The boy was mocked for his disgraceful class, and he died that very night, smashing his temple against a stone corner, and within his body another awoke, an engineer. One who could see at a glance that the city wall wouldn't hold even against a drunken mob armed with crowbars, and that the black smoke on the horizon was burning cities drawing closer. He has only the walls and a few months left before the enemy reaches the gates. First comes the cold. The stone floor presses into his bare back. Then the pain strikes. His temple throbs as if a nail had been driven in and forgotten. He throws his eyes open. A low ceiling, dark beams. Dust swirls in the slanting rays of dawn. He struggles to sit up, and the world slips away. Hands that aren't his, slender, pale, fingers too long and too young. He doesn't recognize them. He doesn't recognize the thin legs in canvas pants. He doesn't recognize the ribs showing beneath the skin. 16 years old, maybe 15, definitely not 29. He stands up. His legs are shaking. In the corner, a mirror sticks out, cracked diagonally. He walks over and stares intently at a stranger's face. A sharp chin, dark, matted hair. A fresh bruise on his temple is turning yellow at the edges. Gray eyes. Not his eyes. Not his world. He waits to wake up. He doesn't wake up. And then a voice rings out in his head, even, emotionless, like an announcement at a train station. Class, Wall Reinforcer, Level 1. He blinks and reads it again. Bluish letters hang before his eyes like a game interface. He's standing in a stranger's body in a stranger's world, and the system has just informed him that his superpower is walls. Not fire, not lightning, not a lightsaber. Walls. Daniel Reed, 29 years old, structural engineer specializing in earthquake-resistant structures. 12 years designing protective perimeters, reinforcing nuclear power plants. And then a drunk truck plowed into his driver's side door near San Francisco, and it all came to an end. Now he's stuck here, in a boy's body, with walls instead of strength. He'd burst out laughing if his temple weren't throbbing. He turns away from the mirror and walks to the window. The shutter creaks as it gives way. Light stings his eyes. Below lies a small town, tiny, dusty. Gray stone houses huddle close together. People are already scurrying through the winding streets. A woman drags a basket of laundry. An old man pushes a cart. 2 boys chase a skinny goat. Just another morning. But Daniel isn't looking at the town. He's staring intently at the wall. The city wall runs along the perimeter, about 4 meters high. The masonry is old. The stones are haphazardly laid. The mortar is crumbling. The corner tower in the northwest leans about 6 degrees to the left. The foundation has settled. You can see it even from here. For 12 years, Daniel has been reading walls the way others cannot. Cracks, strains, weak spots. Straight sections without a single break mean any battering ram will get through on the first strike. No buttresses, no flanking projections. The towers stick out too far and don't cover the blind spots. This wall won't hold back anything more serious than a drunken mob with crowbars. Then he looks up higher. Fields stretch beyond the wall. Hills beyond the fields. And beyond the hills, black smoke rises into the sky. Thick, heavy. It shoots up in a column and spreads like a dirty stain. Something is burning. Something big. A city. Maybe 2. And the smoke has been rising for a long time. Maybe a week. His chest tightens. Not fear. Not panic. That same professional anger that used to overwhelm him when a contractor poured the foundation wrong and the building ended up on sand. Quiet and precise. He looks at the wall, looks at the smoke, and he utters his first words in this world. Fine. Walls are just walls. He rummages through other people's things on the table. A jacket made of coarse fabric, a couple of copper coins, a pencil stub, a rolled-up sheet of paper with a stamp. He unfolds it. The system highlights the main points. The result of the initiation: name, Dane Corwell. Class, wall reinforcer. Rank, E. Below, someone else's handwriting scrawls something short and dismissive. Recommendation to send to the provinces. Don't waste resources. The body's memory throws up fragments, not words, sensations. Heaviness in the chest, shame, laughter behind his back. The initiation took place in front of people, and when the voice announced the class, someone snorted. Then running, darkness, wet pavement, a blow against a stone corner, pain. And that's it. The boy was running away from shame and cracked his head open, because at 16 he was told he was a nobody. Daniel sits down on the bed. He doesn't know this guy, but he knows one thing. The class that ruined the boy's life is the only thing Daniel Reed knows how to do better than anyone else in the world. He stands up, pulls on his jacket, creaks down the stairs and steps out onto the street. The sun beats down on his face. The air smells of dust and smoke. People turn to look. A small town. Everyone knows the orphan with the disgraceful class. The looks aren't mean. Worse. Pitying. He turns toward the wall, presses his palm against the stone. The stone is warm from the sun, rough. And Daniel feels it. Not with his hands, with new thing that came with the class. He hears every crack, every bubble in the mortar, every strain. The wall speaks to him. Here the pressure runs uneven. Here the mortar has dried out and become brittle. Here 2 stones are held together by a promise. He pulls his hand away and smiles for the first time this morning. Not the boy Dane, but a man who has been building walls for 12 years. A good wall is worth more than 100 bad swords. He knows this better than anyone in this world. All that's left is to prove it. Daniel walks along the wall and counts his steps. He memorizes the turns. He notes where the masonry has sagged, where the rain has washed out a groove in the mortar. The perimeter is almost a perfect rectangle, and that's bad. Straight lines are a weakness. A blow comes perpendicular, and all the force goes into the wall. A broken line would disperse the blow. The towers stick out at the corners like square stumps, and none of them covers the one next to it. A whole squad could approach unnoticed. There's only one gate, wooden with iron strips. No barbican, no moat, nothing. He freezes at the gate. He shifts his gaze to the smoke. If what's burning over there reaches here, these gates will hold out for 10 minutes. He'll close the flank in an hour. He closes his eyes, and a plan forms in his mind of its own accord. Weak points, directions of attack, sectors to cover. First the problem, then the solution, then the blueprint. The problem is enormous. The solution will take months. But he can already see the first step. The crooked corner tower. If it collapses, it'll take down 20 meters of wall on each side, a gaping hole through which everything will pour in. He turns and goes to find the foreman. The foreman's name is Bolt Hanmar. He's heavy-set, red-faced, perpetually dissatisfied. He looks down at the boy, and pity flashes in his eyes. Orphan Corwell. Daniel cuts straight to the point. The corner tower is leaning, 6 degrees of tilt. The foundation has settled on the west side. Beneath the tower lies an old stream bed. The soil is eroded. In a year, it will fall and take 40 meters of wall. The village elder frowns. The tower has been leaning for 10 years now, and nothing has been done. The masons said it would stand for another 20. There's no money, there are no people. There are more pressing concerns than a crooked little tower. Daniel doesn't back down. The masons were wrong. The tilt accelerates with every rainy season. He isn't asking for money. He needs 1 day and 3 men with shovels. The village headman stares at him for a long time, as if he were a fly that would be easier to swat. Then he waves his hand. Take your men if you can find any fools. I won't give you any money. If you break something, you'll be working it off until you're old. Finding 3 turns out to be none. The first 2 at the market take him for a joker. The third doesn't listen. The fourth laughs in his face. A young laborer is going to repair a tower. It sounds like a joke. Daniel isn't angry. He's ready. In the end, he recruits 3. 2 day laborers out of work. The third is an old man who once laid bricks but now lives on handouts. He promises them a day's pay from his meager savings. 2 coins are enough for the 3 of them. In the morning, they meet at the tower. Daniel is already there. He spent the night here. He's been feeling the stones, listening to the wall, drawing with chalk on the ground. By dawn, he knows everything. The watercourse runs from west to east right under the foundation. The ground has settled 12 centimeters. The crack creeps from the base to the 3rd row. The tower stands on sheer stubbornness. He positions the men and shows them where to dig. The shovel breaks through the foundation and Daniel crouches down. He pulls out a pencil stub and draws directly on the stone. Lines, angles, arrows, reinforcement with buttresses, load redistribution, drainage to divert water from the bed. Every line in place. The system tolerates no sloppiness. He's already figured that out. By noon, a crowd gathers. First the boys, then the women from the well, then the men from the market. Everyone stares as the orphan Corwell crawls around the tower and draws with chalk. Someone twirls a finger at his temple. Someone cackles. Old Borges, the city master builder, stands to the side with his arms crossed and watches with undisguised mat. Daniel doesn't notice. He finishes drawing. He straightens up. He walks around the tower one last time. He checks every line. Everything is correct. He presses his palm against the stone. He closes his eyes, and he speaks. Stonework reinforcement. Silence. A second. 2. The stone beneath his palm grows warm. Not hot. Warm. As if alive. And the tower shudders. The crowd recoils. Someone cries out. The tower shudders and creeps forward, slowly. Stones grind against one another. The crack at the base closes. Stone fuses with stone. Mortar fills the cracks. 2 buttresses rise from the ground at the base. A minute ago, they weren't there. Now they're growing. Stone by stone, row by row, exactly according to the blueprint, exactly at the angle Daniel drew. The tower straightens. 6 degrees become 5, then 2, then 0. The masonry compacts. The old weak spots disappear. New bonds form where he drew the arrows. This lasts a minute, maybe a minute and a half. Then everything freezes. The tower stands level, for the first time in 10 years. The 2 buttresses dig into the ground like roots. The drainage the soil in a straight line and carries the water away. Daniel removes his hand. He is reeling. His mana is completely spent. His head is spinning, and he grabs the wall to keep from collapsing. But he stands. The crowd is silent. Foreman Bolt sinks to the ground. He simply sits down. His legs won't hold him. The day laborer presses his palm to his forehead and traces the sign of the local god. Old Borges freezes with his mouth open, his hands no longer crossed. And then Daniel hears a sound. Quiet. Wooden. The clatter of a basket on the cobblestones. He turns around. A girl, about 16, blonde hair under a scarf, an apron covered in flour. A basket of bread lies at her feet. She looks at him, not at the tower, at him, the way no one has ever looked at Dane Corwell. He doesn't yet know her name, or that she too was in the domestic science class, and too heard the laughter behind her back. He simply sees her eyes, and what burns within them. Not admiration, not surprise. Hope. Quiet and cautious, like a candle flame in a draught. He turns away, looks at the tower, then at the smoke on the horizon, then at the wall that is still old and weak and unsuitable for real defense. The first step has been taken. There are still several thousand more to go. He slept until the following afternoon. His body wouldn't obey him. His mana had dropped to 0, and his system had simply shut down. Daniel collapsed onto the mattress that evening and opened his eyes when the sun was at its zenith. His head was clear. His temples hardly ached at all. His mana had recovered. Not all of it, maybe a third, but enough to get up and start thinking. He sat up on the bed and summoned the system interface. Blue letters obediently appeared before his eyes. Cool. Wall Reinforcer. Level 2. Experience, 210 out of 500. Available. Stone Masonry Reinforcement 1. New. Structural Diagnostics 1. Level up. One tower had given him a whole level, and a new ability had unlocked. Structural Diagnostics. Daniel mentally tapped the description. Allows you to identify structural weaknesses in stone and earthen structures upon physical contact. Range, 3 meters. He smirked. Yesterday he'd done this by hand, by eye and experience. Now the system was offering to automate the process. Useful. He got dressed and went out. Everything had changed on the street. Not the city. The city was the same. Attitudes had changed. People were looking at him. Yesterday it had been pity. Today it was something else. Not respect, not yet. Curiosity. Wary attention. Like at an unfamiliar dog. Maybe friendly, or maybe it will bite. A young apprentice at the blacksmith shop waved at him. A woman by the well. The old man on the corner watched him go. Daniel reached the wall and placed his palm on it. He activated diagnostics. And the world changed. The stone became transparent. Not to the eye, to the senses. He could feel every layer, every cavity, every stress line. Red threads ran where the masonry creaked under the load. Blue where the structural integrity was sufficient. There was little blue. There was a lot of red. The wall was sick. Daniel spent 3 hours tracing the perimeter. He touched the stones every 10 steps. He drew marks with chalk. A triangle meant critical weakness. A circle meant requires attention. A cross meant normal. There were 47 triangles. There were 3 crosses. When he finished and returned to the gate, he saw 2 people. The first was the town elder, Bolt. He stood with the expression of a man who didn't know whether to be glad or afraid. The second was a woman, tall, straight back. Her black hair was pulled back into a tight braid draped over her left shoulder. A short sword hung at her belt. On her shoulders was worn leather armor with the city guard insignia. Her face was stern. Her eyes were dark and watchful. Captain of the Guard, Hana So. Daniel knew that name from fragments of Dane's memory. Captain Hana. Stern, fair, neither cruel nor kind, just doing her job. She looked at him without pity and without curiosity, with a critical eye, the way one looks at a tool, useful or not. The town elder cleared his throat. He said that after yesterday's incident with the tower, he had questions, that complaints had come from Master Borges, that the use of magic on city structures without the city council's permission was technically a violation, but that he personally was willing to turn a blind eye to it if Dane explained exactly what he had done and what else he could do. Daniel looked at the mayor, then at Hana, then at the wall behind them, and began to speak. He spoke simply, without technical terms, just as he would explain to a foreman on a construction site. He said that the wall was bad, that it wouldn't withstand an attack, that straight sections break more easily than curved ones, that the towers don't cover the blind spots, that a gate without a moat and outer fortifications is just a door that can be smashed open with a single battering ram. He said he'd seen smoke on the horizon, that he didn't know exactly what was burning, but he knew it had been burning for a long time, and that if what's burning out there ever comes here, this city will die in a single night. The mayor turned pale. Kana's expression didn't change, but her hand rested on the hilt of her sword. Not threateningly, reflexively. That's what people who are used to danger do. Daniel continued. He said he could fix it. Not in a day, in a month, maybe 2. He needs helping hands, stone, earth, wood for formwork, and permission to rebuild the perimeter. The village head asked how to rebuild it. Daniel crouched down. He picked up a stick and began to sketch on the ground. He was drawing the new perimeter, a jagged line instead of a straight one, projections at every turn for flanking, towers closer together, a moat in front of the wall, not deep, 1.5 meters, but with a reverse slope, the inner edge steep, the outer edge gentle. This meant that anyone who jumped into the moat would slide down easily, but wouldn't be able to climb out quickly on the other side. And while they were scrambling, they'd be exposed to fire from above. He drew for about 10 minutes. The village head and Hana watched in silence. When he finished, there was a diagram on the ground that resembled nothing seen in this world. Because in this world, fortification was not studied. Wars were won by mages. Walls were just scenery. But mages couldn't stop the smoke on the horizon. Hana spoke first. She asked how an orphan from Havenrest knew such things. Daniel replied that it was part of his class, that the system gave him an understanding of walls and defensive structures. It was a half-truth. The system provided the tool. Knowledge came from 12 years of work. But a half-truth was safer here than the truth. Hana looked at him for a long time. Then she said that military matters were decided by the military, that she wasn't going to discuss the city's defense with a 16-year-old boy, that the tower was a trick, and real war was something else entirely. She turned and walked away. The village elder sighed. He said that Hana was no simple woman, that she had her own reasons for not trusting walls, that her father had died on the wall of a neighboring city 3 years ago. The wall had collapsed. Poor masonry. 15 guards died under the rubble along with him. Since then, Kana has believed only in swords and people. In her opinion, stones betray. Daniel nodded. He understood. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked the village elder about workers. The elder scratched the back of his head. He said there was no money in the treasury, that the masons were busy repairing houses after the winter, that the only person who could spare some men was Borgas. And Borgas, after yesterday, was as mad at him as a dog is at a cat. Daniel nodded again. He goes to look for Borgas. Borgas was found in the workshop by the south wall, a big man with big hands and small eyes. 30 years of construction experience. He knew every stone in the city, and now he was looking at Daniel the way a master looks at an apprentice who dared to give orders. The conversation was brief. Borgas said that yesterday's trick with the tower was magic and nothing more, that any magician could move stones, that this wasn't construction or craftsmanship, that the boy didn't understand a thing about real stonework, and that if he touched the city wall again without the master's permission, Borgas would personally see to the consequences. Daniel listened. He could have started arguing. He could have explained about buttresses and load distribution and drainage, but he knew people like that. He'd worked with them for 12 years. Old masters don't listen to words. They only listen to results. So he simply asked Borgas for permission to look around his workshop. Borgas was surprised, but didn't refuse. Daniel walked around the workshop. He looked at the tools, at the stones, at the masonry samples by the wall, at the drawings, if you could call them that. Rough sketches. No scale, no calculations, based on intuition and experience. Then he spotted the problem. The south wall of the workshop. The bottom row of masonry was bulging inward by 1.5 centimeters, imperceptible to the average person. To an engineer, it was a red flag. He asked Borgas how long the workshop had been settling on the south side. Borgas froze. He looked at the wall. He looked at Daniel. He asked how he knew. Daniel pointed to the protruding row. He explained that soil pressure from the outside was pushing the lower rows inward, that in a year the wall would crack and the corner of the workshop would sink, and that if they built a buttress on the outside and diverted water away from the foundation, it would stand for another 50 years. Borgas was silent for a long time. He knew about the sinking. He'd noticed it himself. But he didn't understand why, and didn't know what to do. The boy came, and within a minute named the cause and the solution. Borgas didn't become Daniel's friend that day, but he stopped being his enemy. He grumbled that he'd provide 2 apprentices for 3 days, no more, and that if the boy ruined the wall, it would be a different story. Daniel took the 2 apprentices. He added 3 day laborers from yesterday, 5 workers, not many, but enough to start with. He began with the ditch, not the wall. The ditch is the first line of defense, the simplest. No magic needed, just shovels and backs. He marked out the line, 1.5 meters deep, 3 meters wide, a reverse slope, the inner edge almost vertical, the outer edge gentle at 30 degrees. The soil from the trench was to be piled up in front of the wall, an earthen rampart, another line of defense. The work progressed slowly. 5 men and a boy engineer. On the first day, they dug 20 meters. There were nearly 800 meters ahead. Daniel calculated in his head. At this rate, the moat would be ready in 40 days. Too long. They needed more people, but there were no people. On the 3rd day, something happened that changed the situation. A group approached the city gates. 12 people, men and women, dirty, ragged. One of the men's right arm hung limply. 2 women were carrying children. Refugees from Talmark, the city beyond the hills, the very city from which the black smoke had risen. Talmark had fallen. Daniel stood by the moat as they passed through the gates. He saw their faces, empty, blank. The faces of people who had seen everything they knew cease to exist. The village elder took them in. He settled them in empty houses. He gave them food. That evening, Daniel came to him. He asked what had happened to Talmark. The village elder told him what he had learned from the refugees. Demons. Dark creatures from the northern rift. A pack of several dozen. They came at night. Talmark's wall was taller than in Havenrest, 6 meters, stone, with towers. And it held out for 2 hours. The demons passed through the gates as if they were made of paper. The city guard fought and fell to the last man. A B-rank fire mage killed 6 of the creatures and died. Of the 3,000 residents, 200 made it out. The rest didn't make it in time. Daniel listened and did the math. Several dozen demons. The wall was 6 meters high. 2 hours. His wall was 4 meters high. No moat, no jagged line, no crossfire. He wouldn't have 2 hours. He'd have 20 minutes. He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the wall and looked north, toward where Talmark lay dead beyond the hills, toward where they could come from and reach here. In the morning, he went to the mayor again, and this time he spoke differently. He didn't ask. He explained. Talmark was bigger and better fortified. Talmark fell. Havenrest is next. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. Demons don't bypass cities. They march right through them. And when they come here, this wall won't hold them back for even an hour. If the city doesn't want to become the next Talmark, it needs to get to work. Right now. Everyone who can hold a shovel. Every day. No days off. The mayor was silent. Then he asked quietly, "Will your wall hold?" Daniel replied, "If you give me men and 2 months, it will hold." It wasn't confidence. It was a promise, and he was going to keep it. That day, there were no longer just 5 people working on the moat. There were 23. Among them were 4 refugees from Talmark, people who had seen what happens when the wall fails. The moat grew, 30 to 40 meters every day. 23 people with shovels and wheelbarrows worked from dawn to dusk. Daniel worked alongside them. He dug. He hauled dirt. His body was weak, and by evening his hands were shaking so much he couldn't hold a pencil. But he didn't stop. A boy with a disgraceful class must work harder than anyone else. That's how this world works. Respect here isn't earned with words. It's earned with sweat and calluses. A week later, the moat had reached a quarter of the perimeter, 200 meters. Daniel worked on the wall at the same time. Every evening, when his mana had recovered, he would go to the wall and activate stonework reinforcement. Not on the entire wall at once. That was impossible. He had enough mana for a section 5 or 6 meters long. He drew up a plan. He divided the perimeter into sectors. He numbered them. 1 sector every evening. Critical points first. Triangles, then circles. The crosses could wait. The reinforcement didn't make the wall perfect. It made it stronger. The stones fit more tightly together. The mortar filled the voids. The cracks closed up. The 4-meter height remained 4 meters. But those 4 meters now held the load twice as well. The system granted experience for each reinforced sector. Little by little, the level crept upward. By the end of the 2nd week, he was at level 4, a new ability, Stone Block Formation 1. Allows you to form a stone block of a specified shape from raw stone, provided there is sufficient material. Maximum size, 1.5 by 1.5 by 1.5 meters. This changed everything. Before, construction required cutting stone by hand. Stonemasons worked for hours to shape a block into the desired form. Now Daniel could do it in seconds. Perfect blocks, smooth edges, precise dimensions. He showed this to Borgas. He placed his hand on the shapeless block, a blueprint in his mind. Activation. The stone cracked and crumbled into dust. A perfect rectangular block remained in the center, as if machined. Borgas watched in silence. Then he stepped closer. He ran his hand along the edge. He felt the joint with his finger. He tapped it. He stepped back. He looked at it from the other side. And he said that in 30 years he hadn't seen such a smooth block. His voice was hoarse. Daniel proposed a deal. He would shape the blocks. Borgas and his men would lay them. Together, they could build 5 times faster than separately. Borgas thought about it for 3 days. Then he came and said he agreed, but that he would supervise the masonry. Daniel agreed. He didn't care who was in charge. What mattered was that the wall was growing. By the end of the 3rd week, they began erecting new towers. Daniel placed the first one at the northwest corner, next to the house with the tower he had straightened on the first day. The new tower was different. Not square, pentagonal. The sharp corner faced outward. That way, a blow would strike the edge rather than the surface and be deflected. The embrasures were arranged not in a row, but in a staggered pattern. The lower ones looked down toward the moat, the upper ones forward and to the sides. Crossfire, no blind spots. Borgas looked at the drawing and didn't understand why the tower had 5 walls instead of 4. Daniel explained. He drew a diagram. He used arrows to show how the impact was distributed across the pentagon and how it was dispersed across the square. He knew the firing sectors. He pointed out the blind spots in the square tower and their absence in the pentagonal one. Borgas listened. He was silent. Then, he said it made sense. It was the first time he'd said anything positive about Daniel's work. A small victory, but an important one. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the city was changing. Refugees kept arriving. Not from Talmark, from the surrounding villages. 5 or 6 people at a time, sometimes 10. With each group came news. The demons were moving south. 2 more villages had been burned. The royal army was fighting 100 kilometers to the north, but the front line was not stable. Havenrest was far from the main lines of attack. For now. It hung in the air like a storm that hadn't arrived yet, but was already visible in the dark clouds. People could feel it. Work on the moat and the wall was moving faster. There were more volunteers. No longer 23, 35, then 40. Fear is an excellent motivator. Lila came every day. She brought bread and water for the workers. Daniel saw her every day, but spoke little. Not because he didn't want to, because there was no time. He worked 18 hours a day. Blueprints, calculations, forming blocks, reinforcing the masonry, organizing the work. His body was still weak and 16-year-old, and every evening he collapsed from exhaustion as if he'd been mowed down. But Lila came. Silently, she set the basket down next to him. Silently, she left. Sometimes he noticed that in the basket, besides the bread, there was a hot flatbread wrapped in a rag, separate from the rest. For him. He ate and went back to work. One evening she didn't leave right away. She sat down on a rock next to him and watched as he sketched the plan for the 3rd tower on the ground. She asked why the tower was pentagonal. Daniel explained it to her just as he had to Borgas. About dispersing the impact. About crossfire. She listened attentively. She didn't nod out of politeness. She was really listening. Then she said it looked like bread. Daniel didn't understand. She explained. When you knead dough, it's important to distribute the pressure. If you press in one spot, the dough tears. If you spread it across the whole surface, it gets stronger. The right shape helps withstand the pressure. Daniel looked at her. She was right. She had described one of the basic principles of strength of materials. In a baker's terms, he said that was exactly right, and that she was a natural-born engineer. She blushed and left. By the end of the 1st month, the moat was finished. 812 meters, 1.5 meters deep, 3 meters wide. A reverse slope along the entire perimeter. An earthen rampart in front of the wall, not very high, 1 meter, but that 1 meter would slow down anyone who approached. 2 new towers stood at the northwest and northeast corners, pentagonal, with crossfire. The wall was fortified along 70% of the perimeter. The southern and south sections remained. Level 8. New abilities. Stone Masonry Reinforcement 2. Increased radius and effectiveness. Stone Block Formation 2. Maximum size 3 by 3 by 3 meters. Structural Bonding 1. Allows for the creation of an unbreakable bond between two stone structures. The latter was key. Structural bonding meant that the wall and the tower became a single entity, not two separate structures placed next to each other. 1. A blow to the wall was distributed through the tower. A blow to the tower was distributed through the wall. The entire structure functioned as a monolith. Daniel connected the first 2 towers to the wall that same evening. He placed his palms on the joint. He activated the bonding. The stone hummed. The seam between the tower and the wall vanished. It wasn't filled with mortar. It vanished. The stones fused together. The wall and the tower became a single entity. Borges stood nearby and watched. Then he quietly said he needed a drink and left. But in the morning he returned with 3 additional apprentices and said that the southern section had to be finished by the end of next week. He didn't say why. He didn't say he was worried. He didn't say he was afraid. He just brought the men and told them to work. Daniel understood. Borges had been building for 30 years. He had seen walls. He had seen towers. He had seen the masonry. And he saw that what this young man was building was unlike anything from his past experience. He didn't understand why it was right, but he felt that it was right. Because a good master feels the right construction just as a musician feels the right note. Borges felt it, and that was enough. On the last day of the month, Daniel stood on the roof of the northwest tower and looked down on the city from above. The moat stretched like a dark ribbon around the walls. The earthen rampart stretched behind it. 2 new towers stood like fangs clenched into the corners of the perimeter. The wall was stronger than it had been a month ago, several times over. But it wasn't enough. Daniel looked toward the horizon. The smoke in the north had grown thicker, closer. In a month, maybe 2, they would come. And the wall had to be ready. Not just good, perfect. He went downstairs, unfolded a new blueprint, and began drawing the 3rd and 4th towers. The second month began with rain, 5 days in a row. The moat filled with water, and Daniel saw what he had planned to see. The reverse slope worked. Water flowed toward the outer edge and collected in a narrow channel at the foot of the rampart. Anyone who tried to cross would find themselves waist-deep in mud and water with a steep bank right in front of them. Good. But the rain had halted construction. The workers sat under the awnings and waited. Daniel didn't wait. He sat in his room and sketched. The 3rd tower, the 4th tower, the wall sections between them. Sections with a feature he'd been mulling over since the first week. Shock-absorbing cushions. The idea came from his world. Earthquake-resistant structures are built with layers. Soft layers are placed between the rigid ones. Rubber, sand, special polymers. Upon impact, the soft layer compresses and absorbs the energy. The rigid structure breaks. The cushioned one bends and springs back. In this world, there was no rubber or polymers, but there was clay. There was earth. There was sand. Daniel designed a section of the wall with 3 layers. The outer layer was stone, thick, strong. Behind it was a layer of compacted clay mixed with sand. Then an inner layer of stone, thinner than the outer layer, but also reinforced with magic. If a demon strikes such a wall, the stone might crack, but the clay cushion would absorb the blow, and the inner layer would remain intact. The wall would not collapse. It will bend. It will hold. And Daniel will be able to repair the cracked outer layer with stonework reinforcement. It was a revolution. In a world where walls were built in a single layer and people relied on thickness, it was like inventing a bulletproof vest in a world of chainmail. When the rain stopped, he showed the blueprint to Borgas. Borgas stared at it for a long time. He squinted. He ran his finger along the lines. Then he asked why they would put clay between the stones. Stone is stronger than clay. Why put something weak between two strong things? Daniel took 2 stones and a piece of wet clay. He placed the clay between the stones. He squeezed. The clay compressed. The stones didn't crack. Then he removed the clay. He placed one stone on top of the other. He squeezed. The bottom stone cracked. Borgas looked at the cracked stone, then at the clay, then at Daniel. He said one word. "We're building." They began the 3rd tower at the southwest corner, the 4th at the southeast. At the same time, they began rebuilding the sections of the wall between the towers into a 3-layer structure. There was 3 times as much work. Each section required dismantling the old masonry, laying the outer layer, tamping down the clay, laying the inner layer, binding, reinforcing. There were already 50 workers. Refugees kept coming. Not all of them could work, but those who could went to the wall. They didn't need to be told why. They saw why. They had come from places where the walls had failed. In the 2nd week of the 2nd month, Kana arrived, not to the village elder, to him. She stood at the edge of the moat and looked down. Then she climbed the northwest tower. She went inside. She came out. She walked along the wall. She stopped at every embrasure. She looked through each one. She checked the firing angles. Daniel watched her from a distance. She was doing what any soldier would do, assessing positions, counting sectors, and he saw her face change. She approached him that evening, no bottle, no smile, a notebook in her hand. She said she'd walked the entire perimeter, that the towers provided a 360-degree view, that there were no blind spots left, that the moat was smart and the earthen rampart was right, but that the city had 40 guards and 12 militiamen, 52 people for 800 meters of wall. That's 1 person per 15 meters. That's nothing. The wall might be perfect, but without people on it, it's just stone. Daniel replied that he knew. That's why he needed her. He needed someone who could position the men correctly. Someone who knew where to place an archer and where a spearman. Someone who could command and whom they would obey. He builds walls. She defends walls. Together, it works. Alone, it doesn't. Hannah was silent. Then she said she didn't trust stones. Daniel said he wasn't asking her to trust the stones. He was asking her to trust him. She looked him in the eyes, long and straight. Then she nodded. Once. From that day on, Hannah came every morning. She and Daniel walked along the wall together. He showed her the structure. She showed him tactics. He'd say, "Here, a loophole with a sloped bottom so the archer can shoot down into the moat." She'd say, "Here, we need a platform for 3 spearmen because if the enemy climbs here, this is where the main pressure will be." He'd change the blueprint. She'd change the positioning. They worked. Not as friends, like tools in a single mechanism. Precisely. Precisely. Without unnecessary words. In the 3rd week, 2 events occurred. First, Daniel reached level 10 and gained a new ability. Rune Compatibility 1 allows magical runes to be integrated into fortified structures with enhanced connection efficiency. He stared at the description for a long time. Runes. That meant magical reinforcement of the walls, not just stone. Stone with spells. But he didn't know runes. He couldn't write them. He didn't understand their logic. He needed a specialist. The second event. A girl approached the gates of Haven Rest, alone, with a backpack bigger than herself, wearing glasses on a pale face, soaked from the rain. She asked the guard if she could enter. The guard asked who she was and where she was from. She replied that her name was Ari Venholt, that she was a runologist, that she had been expelled from the Capital Academy of Magic for a useless specialization. Static runes of defense, not attack. She's looking for work. Any work. She's willing to mop floors if necessary. The guard took her to the warden. The warden took her to Daniel. Because over the past 2 months in Haven Rest, an unspoken rule had taken hold. Anything to do with walls and defense goes to the boy. Daniel looked at her. Skinny, short, thick glasses with round lenses, dark, wet hair, fingers stained with ink. She stuttered when she spoke. She was nervous, used to being turned away. He asked to see her thesis work. She took some sheets rolled into a tube out of her backpack. She unrolled them on the table. Daniel watched. Runes. Dozens of runes. Neat. Precise. With explanations. A thermal shock protection diagram. It's applied to stone and absorbs sudden temperature changes. The wall doesn't crack from fire. The stone doesn't crumble from the heat. Daniel looked at the diagram and didn't see runes. He saw thermal insulation. He saw a fireproof coating. He saw what his walls were missing. Protection against magical fire. The demons from the rift used dark magic. Fire, acid, cold. Stone without runic protection could crack from a single spell. With runic protection, it would become invulnerable. He looked at Ari. She stood there, waiting for him to say no. She was used to rejections. He told her she had an excellent diagram for protection against thermal shock. She blinked, then again. Then her lower lip, and she turned away very quickly, took off her glasses, rubbed her eyes, put her glasses back on, and turned back around. He pretended not to notice. He said he needed a runologist, that he had rune compatibility and walls ready to accept runes, that if she agreed, he would provide her with a workshop and materials and work that no other person in this world would offer her. She agreed. Her voice trembled, but her hands, as she laid out her tools, were absolutely steady, the hands of a master. Daniel knew people like that. Hands don't lie. He found her a place for a workshop, a room at the base of the northwest tower. Quiet, with good light through a loophole facing east. Morning light is best for precision work. The stone walls dampened vibrations and noise from the street. Ari entered the room and stopped. She looked at the light, at the walls, at the table made of a single block of stone that Daniel had shaped especially for her, with a perfectly smooth surface. She ran her hand over the stone. She looked up at Daniel. He shrugged and said that a runologist should work in good conditions. She said nothing. She simply began unpacking her tools. Her hands were no longer trembling. Daniel left and closed the door behind him. In the evening, he stood on the wall and looked at the city. Lights were burning below. The smell of bread wafted from Lila's bakery. Hannah walked by and nodded at him, without stopping. A business-like nod. A working nod. Somewhere down below, in the workshop, Ari was already drawing the first runes by lamplight, Daniel thought. A month ago, he had been alone. A boy with a disgraceful class and a wall that was crumbling in the wind. Now he had walls that could withstand an assault. a moat that slowed the enemy, towers that saw everything, a master builder who worked with him, a captain of the guard who planned the defense, and a runologist who could make his stones invulnerable. He looked north. The smoke on the horizon hadn't diminished. It was getting closer. Time was running out. But for the first time in 2 months, Daniel felt that this city had a chance. Ari was working quickly, faster than Daniel had expected. In the first week, she inscribed thermal protection runes onto the outer layer of the northern wall. 120 meters. The runes glowed with a faint blue light as the ink dried, then were absorbed into the stone and vanished. But they were there. Daniel could feel them when he touched the wall, a warm hum beneath his palm. The stone had changed. It was alive. They were working together. Daniel was reinforcing the section of the wall with magic. Ari was applying runes over the reinforcement. The system accepted the runes as part of the structure. Rune compatibility made the connection between the magic and the runes stronger than if Ari had simply drawn on ordinary stone. The rune's effectiveness increased by 40%. Ari measured it herself. She double-checked it 3 times. Then she went to Daniel and said, in a voice without a stutter, that his class wasn't useless, that his class was the perfect platform for runic defense, that no mage she knew could provide such a foundation for the runes. She spoke quickly and excitedly, waving her arms and nearly knocking over the inkwell. Daniel caught the inkwell. Ari blushed. He said it only worked because her runes were perfect. She blushed even more and went into the workshop and didn't come out until morning. By the end of the 2nd month, the north and west walls were completely covered in runes. Thermal protection, resistance to acid erosion, reinforcement against impact loads. 3 layers of runes on each section. Ari said she could add a rune to dispel dark magic, but for that she needed a component that wasn't available in the city. Moon salt. Mined in mountain caves to the west. Daniel made a note of it. Later. There were more important things right now. Level 14. New ability. Checkpoint 1. Allows him to sense the condition of a fortified structure from a distance. Maximum range, 50 meters. Up to 3 points at a time. It was reconnaissance. Now Daniel could sit in the tower and know what was happening to any section of the wall within a 50-meter radius. A crack. Pressure. An impact. He felt it all. 3 points weren't enough. But this was the first level. There would be more. At sunset, on the last day of the 2nd month, they came. Daniel was on the south wall when Sona screamed. Not Sona. He didn't know her name yet. The girl on the north tower. The watch on duty. She saw them first. Dust on the horizon. Then figures. Black. Fast. Low to the ground. They moved in a pack, like wolves. But larger than wolves. Much larger. Hana was there a minute later. She looked in the direction the girl had pointed. She counted. 12. Maybe 15. Scout demons. A pack. Not an assault group. Not an army. Reconnaissance. They had come to look. Hana began giving orders. Guards to the walls, militia to the gates, archers to the towers, women and children to the cellars. The city sprang into action within minutes. Daniel climbed the northwest tower. The view was best from there. He watched them approach. It was his first time seeing demons. Black hide, not fur, something else. Smooth, light-absorbing. 4 legs, elongated snouts, red eyes. 6, no, 8 eyes on each. The size of a horse. No, bigger. Their claws left furrows in the ground. They ran in silence. No roar, no scream. Silent. That was worse. 12 creatures. 14. He counted 14. They ran to the ditch and stopped. The first demon approached the edge, sniffed, tilted its head. 8 red eyes looked down, at the water, at the mud, at the steep inner slope. Then they looked up, at the wall, at the towers, at the people on the walls. The demon stood and watched. He thought. Daniel stood and watched him. He thought. It was a reconnaissance mission. They hadn't come to storm the city. They'd come to check it out, to see the wall, to assess it, to memorize it, and to leave, so they could return later with real force. Hannah thought the same. She stood on the tower nearby and said quietly that they couldn't let them leave with the information, that if even one returned, he would tell the others that there was a city here with people and walls. Daniel looked at her. She was right, but he had no offensive magic. He couldn't kill even one. He could only hold the walls. Hannah didn't expect him to attack. She expected him to hold the walls. She asked if he could close the moat. Daniel didn't understand. She explained. If the demons entered the moat and it closed behind them, they would be trapped. The moat becomes a trap. Archers and spearmen strike from above. The demons can't get out. Daniel thought. A moat is a ditch, not a wall. The system treats as a wall whatever he designates as part of the defensive perimeter. The moat is part of the perimeter. If he designates the moat walls as walls, could he raise a section of the wall? Block the exit? He said he would try. Hannah nodded. She ordered the archers not to shoot, to wait. The demons stood by the moat for 10 minutes. Then one jumped, then a second, a third. They slid down the gentle outer slope. They ended up in the muddy water at the bottom. The steep inner slope was in front of them. They began to climb. Their claws scraped against the wet clay. They slipped. One pulled himself up. 2 slid back down. Daniel ran down, to the base of the wall, to the spot where the moat came closest. He placed his palms on the ground, on the edge of the moat, and began to sketch. In his head, not on paper. There was no time. He visualized the design. The outer wall of the moat, a gentle slope. It had to become a wall, vertical, to seal off the section, to turn 20 meters of the moat into a stone bag. The system, forming the stone block, reinforcing the stone masonry, immediately, simultaneously. Mana surged from him in a torrent. The earth shook. The gentle outer slope of the ditch, over a 20-meter stretch, began to rise. Clay and stone grew upward, forming a wall, 1.5 meters, 2.5. A vertical wall cut off the section of the moat from the outside world. The 7 demons found themselves inside, in a stone bag, 20 meters long, 3 meters wide, 2.5 meters deep, with no way out. Daniel fell to his knees. His mana was gone, almost. Sparks before his eyes, nausea. But he kept his palms on the ground and held his form. Hannah screamed. The archers on the wall opened fire. Arrows flew down into the stone bag. The demons thrashed about, jumped, scratched the walls with their claws. The black hide was tough. Arrows bounced off it. But not all of them. Eyes, maws, joints. Hannah knew where to aim. Her archers knew where to aim. 4 demons fell in the first minute, arrows to the eyes. The remaining 3 leaped and slammed into the walls. The stone hummed under the blows. Daniel felt every blow through the control point. The walls of the moat were thin, temporary. 1 demon kept striking the same spot. A crack. Daniel clenched his teeth and poured his last drops of mana into the wall. The crack closed. Another minute. 2. The spearmen rappelled down the ropes. Hannah was first, spear in hand. She leaped into the moat and stabbed the first demon in the eye, right through it. The creature collapsed. The second was killed by a guard, a spear through the mouth. The third managed to slash with its claws. One of the guards was flung against the wall, his shoulder guard torn apart. But Hana was already there. 2 strikes, precise, quick. The third demon fell. 7 out of 14. Bagged. And the rest? Daniel looked up. The remaining 7 stood outside the moat. They were staring at their dead kin. 8 red eyes on each face. Motionless. Thinking. Then they turned and ran. Back. Toward the horizon. Fast. Very fast. Hana stood in the ditch, knee-deep in muddy water, watching them go. Then she looked up at Daniel. He was sitting on the edge of the wall, pale, shivering. His hands were shaking so much he couldn't lift his head. Mana at 0. His body was failing. But he was smiling, because the wall had held, the ditch had held, the stone bag had held. The engineering solution devised in 30 seconds had worked. Hana climbed out of the moat. She walked over to him. She looked down at him. She was covered in mud and blood, and her eyes were burning. She said one word. "It works." Then she held out her hand. He took it. She pulled him to his feet. That evening they counted the casualties. 1 wounded guard, a laceration on his shoulder. He'll live. 7 dead demons. Not a single dead resident. Not one. Daniel lay on his mattress and stared at the ceiling. His body felt empty. His mana was empty. But inside, there was something warm. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. In his past life, he had built walls for buildings and stations. Abstractly, on paper. He had never seen his work save lives in real time. Today he had. A knock at the door. He said, "Come in." Lila entered, with a basket. In the basket was bread, hot, fresh from the oven, and a bowl of soup. She set the basket on the table. She looked at him. He was lying there, pale, thin, and dirty. She sat down next to him on the edge of the bed, silently. She didn't say a word. She just sat there. A minute later, Daniel fell asleep. When he woke up, it was morning. Lila was gone. The basket was still on the table. The bread had gone cold. A film had formed on the soup. But next to the bowl lay a rag, and inside it was a hot flatbread. Fresh, morning-baked. She had come twice, in the evening and in the morning. He ate the flatbread, got up, got dressed, went out onto the wall. Havenrest stood. The walls stood. The people were alive. The first battle had been won. But the 7 demons had left. They would return, and next time, there wouldn't be 14 of them. Daniel looked north and began to think about the next line of defense. The 7 had left. Daniel thought about it every hour. 7 pairs of 8 red eyes. They saw the wall. They saw the moat. They saw the towers. They saw their kin being killed in a stone sack. They remembered. And they would tell. Time was running out. He didn't know how much. A week? 2? Maybe a month? But definitely not 2. The next wave would come sooner and be stronger. The morning after the battle, Daniel gathered everyone. Elder Bolt, Khan, Borgus, Ari. They gathered in City Hall, a small room with a long table. Daniel spread a map of the city on the table, a complete one. He had been drawing it at night for the past 2 weeks. Every house, every street, every section of the wall, every tower. He said the first battle had shown 3 things. First, the wall holds. The moat works. The towers provide a clear view. The basic defenses are functioning. Second, they are critically short on men. 52 fighters for the entire perimeter is nothing. In a serious assault from multiple directions at once, they physically won't be able to cover all sectors. Third, the demons are smart. They aren't just beasts. They observe, they assess, they learn. Next time, they won't charge into the moat like they did the first time. They'll find another way. So we need to prepare surprises. Kana asked what kind. Daniel pointed to the blueprint. Traps. Not just one, a system of traps between the outer moat and the wall. False exits, collapsible sections, pits with stakes covered by camouflage, a maze trap. The idea was simple. If the enemy can't get through the wall, they'll try to get through the gate. So the gate has to be a trap. He drew it. The outer gate. Sturdy looking. Sturdy enough that the enemy would decide it was worth ramming. Beyond the outer gate, a corridor. Narrow, 10 meters long. The corridor walls are high, 4 meters. Loopholes on both sides. At the end of the corridor is a second gate, the real one. Massive, fortified with magic and runes. The enemy breaks through the outer gate, enters the corridor. The outer gate closes behind him. A falling grate. Stone. The enemy finds himself in a stone bag, 10 meters by 3 meters, loopholes on both sides, open at the top. Archers fire from above and from the sides. Boiling tar, stones, spears, anything and everything. A barbican, a classic pre-gate barbican straight out of Vauban's fortification textbook, only with magical reinforcement. Hannah looked at the blueprint. Then she looked at Daniel, then back at the blueprint. She said it was cruel. Daniel replied that it was effective. She nodded and said she liked it. Borges asked how much stone was needed. Daniel gave a figure. Borges whistled. Then he said he'd find it. Ari raised her hand. She asked if runes could be inscribed on the barbican walls. A fire rune, for example, so that the corridor walls would heat up on command. Daniel looked at her, then at the blueprint, then back at her. He said it was a brilliant idea. Ari adjusted her glasses and buried her nose in her notes, but her ears were red. Building the barbican took 2 weeks. Daniel worked himself to the limit, shaping the blocks, reinforcing the masonry, structural bonding. Every evening he collapsed, exhausted. Every morning he got up and carried on. The level crept upward. 12. 13. New abilities unlocked, one after another. Reinforcement of stone masonry 3. Range increased to 20 meters. Stone block formation 3. Maximum size 5 by 5 by 5 meters. Control point 2. Range 100 meters, 5 points simultaneously. Each new level made him stronger. Not in combat, in construction. The walls grew faster, the blocks formed larger. His control became more precise. He could feel the city, not all of it, but more and more with each passing day. Alongside the barbican, Daniel was working on another project, a secret one. He didn't tell anyone about it except Ari. Underground counterwalls. Demons could dig. He saw claw marks on the stones of slain creatures. Long, hard, adapted for digging. If they can't get through the wall and don't want to walk into a trap at the gate, they'll go underground. So there must be a wall underground too. Daniel started digging, at night, with 2 assistants. A trench along the inner side of the wall, 3 meters deep. He laid stone blocks in the trench, reinforced them with magic. Ari inscribed runes. An underground wall, invisible, hidden, 3 meters below the surface. If a demon starts digging a tunnel, it will hit rock at a depth of 3 meters. And Daniel, through the control points, will feel the impact and know where the enemy is digging. By the end of the 3rd week of the 3rd month, the Barbican was ready. The gates looked imposing, oak doors reinforced with iron. Behind them lay a narrow corridor of monolithic stone joined into a single hole. The corridor walls were covered with Ari's runes, thermal ones. The runes could heat the stone to a temperature at which iron softens. Ari said that activation would require nearly all of her mana, just once. Then she would need an hour to recover. Daniel remembered. 1 shot. That meant he had to use it at the right moment. At the end of the corridor stood a real gate. Stone, not wood. A stone slab a meter thick, fortified to the limit, bonded to the wall. To open it, he would have to break through the wall. And the wall was 3-layered, with a clay core and runes. Hana conducted drills. The guards practiced their formations. Archers on the Barbican walls. Spearmen at the inner gate. Reserves in the alley behind the gates. An escape route in case of a breach. She drilled the men until dark. Then she drilled them by torchlight. Then she let them sleep for 2 hours and drilled them again at dawn. The guards grumbled, but they didn't argue. They too had seen the smoke on the horizon. They too remembered the 7 slain demons in the moat, and they knew the next ones would be bigger. In the middle of the 3rd month, Reyna arrived in the city, not with the refugees, alone, on foot, in a tattered cloak over crumpled armor, a sword on her back, her eyes empty. She walked through the gate, and the guard at the gate recoiled, not out of fear, because of what radiated from her in waves. Exhaustion, pain, emptiness. She was beautiful, even dirty and exhausted. Tall, broad shoulders, dark red hair tied back in a ponytail, a scar on her cheekbone, fresh. She approached the guard and asked if there was a tavern in town. Her voice was steady and hoarse. The guard pointed the way. She left. Daniel found out about her that evening. Hana came to him with a report. An A rank had appeared in town, a sword of light, Reyna Kalestone, a former knight of the 3rd Royal Order. Daniel asked why she was a former knight. Hana answered briefly. Her squad had been wiped out, every last one of them. 24 people. They were holding the pass north of Talmark when the demons flanked them. Reyna was the only one who survived, because she ran. Daniel was silent. Then he asked where she was now. Hana said she was at the tavern, drinking. She hadn't stopped since last night. Daniel didn't go to her, not that evening. He knew that a person in that state didn't need words. They needed time, or the right action. 3 days later, Reyna had sobered up enough to leave the tavern. She stood in the street and looked at the wall, at the towers, at the moat, at the Barbican. She stared for a long time, with an expression Daniel couldn't read. Then she found him. He was on the south wall, reinforcing another section. She walked over and stood silently until he was done. Then she asked who had built all of this. He said he had. She looked down at him. She was a head taller. She asked how old he was. He said 16. She snorted. Then she asked what his class was. He said wall fortifier. She didn't laugh. She didn't grimace. She just nodded. Then she said the walls were good, that she'd seen many walls, fortresses, castles, mountain passes, and that these walls were better than most of what she'd seen. Daniel thanked her. She was silent for a moment. Then she asked if there was a place in the city where he could train. Not in the city, beyond the wall, a place from which he could go out and return, safe, with cover. Daniel understood. She wanted to fight, not against people, against whatever was coming from the north. She needed to fight. It was the only thing she knew how to do, and the only thing that could drown out what was gnawing at her from the inside. But going out into the open field alone was suicide, even for an A rank. She needed a base, a point from which she could go out and to which she could return. He didn't try to comfort her, didn't say she wasn't a coward, didn't say her squad wasn't to blame. He looked at the north wall. Then he took out a pencil and began sketching directly on the stone. A training yard, attached to the outer side of the north wall. A ledge with 3 walls and an open north side. The walls are high, sturdy, fortified. The gate to the courtyard leads from behind the wall through a protected passage. Reyna can go out through the courtyard into the field. She can come back. If the demons corner her at the entrance, the wall behind her will cover her, and the archers from the tower will support her with fire. The courtyard was small, 10 by 15 meters, but enough to stretch her legs and to have a safe retreat. Reyna looked at the blueprint, for a long time, silently. Then she looked at him. Her eyes were wet. She quickly turned away. She said in a hoarse voice that it would do, and she left. Daniel built the courtyard in 4 days. On the 5th day, Reyna walked out through it into the field, with a sword, in armor. Hana stationed 2 archers on the tower above the courtyard. Cover. Reyna was in the field for 2 hours. She returned drenched in sweat. She walked silently through the courtyard. She walked silently through the city. She went to bed in silence. The next day she went out again, and the next, and the next. Every day. A week later, she encountered a demon in the field for the first time. A lone one, a small one, Class D on the local scale. She killed it in 12 seconds. The archers in the tower timed it. 12 seconds. An A-rank swordmaster of light. Even broken and drinking, she was faster and stronger than anything in Havenrest. That evening, she went to see Daniel, with a bottle. He didn't drink. His body was that of a 16-year-old, and his mana regenerated more slowly with alcohol. But he sat beside her while she drank. She didn't talk about her squad. She didn't talk about running away. She talked about the walls. She asked what he thought, how he saw the city, how he decided where to place a tower and at what angle to make a loophole. Daniel talked about firing angles, about dead zones, about load distribution, about how a wall isn't just stone, but a system in which every element supports the rest. Reyna listened. She drank. She listened. Then she said quietly that her squad had died because the wall at the pass had collapsed. Rocks came crashing down and buried 3 of them. The rest were left exposed. The demons came in from the flank through the breach. If the wall had stood, they would still be alive. All 24 of them. Daniel was silent. Then he said that his walls would not fall. She looked at him. For a long time. It was hard. Then she finished the bottle and left. But the next morning, she went out into the field through his yard, and when she was coming back, she placed her palm on the yard wall and stood there for a second. She just touched the stone, and she walked on. The 3rd month was drawing to a close when a man on a white horse rode through the gates of Havenrest. Ceremonial armor, a cloak bearing the royal seal. 4 soldiers followed him. Not combat gear. Ceremonial. Beautiful uniforms. Polished boots. Swords that had never left their scabbards. The royal inspector. His name was Lord Tevis Gran. Lean. Tall. A sharp nose. Quick, piercing eyes. He dismounted at the town hall and demanded a meeting with the city council. Mayor Bolt was sweating and nervous. A royal inspector in Havenrest is an event on the scale of a natural disaster. The last time a representative of the crown was here was 11 years ago. to collect taxes. Tevis was polite, coldly and precisely polite. He surveyed the town, walked along the walls. He peered into the Barbican, stood by the moat, climbed the tower, all in silence, with a face that revealed nothing. Then he asked to be taken to the man who had built the fortifications. The mayor led him to Daniel. Daniel was in the southern sector, on his knees, in dirty pants, with chalk in his hand. He was marking out the foundation for the third tower in the southern section. Two of Borges's apprentices stood nearby, waiting for instructions. Tevis looked down at him for a long time. Then he asked his name, class, rank, and level. Daniel answered, Dane Corwell, wall fortifier, level 15. Tevis wrote it down. Then he asked who had taught him fortification. Daniel said that the class provided the knowledge, a half-truth that had worked on the village elder, and Hana worked here too. Tevis nodded. Then he suggested they take a walk. They walked along the wall, and Tevis asked questions. Lots of questions. Precise and specific. When construction began, how many people were working, how much stone was being used, what was the Barbican's capacity, how many archers could each tower hold, how deep was the moat, what was the angle of the walls, at what distance were the checkpoints located. Daniel answered, precisely, in detail, as if defending the project before the client. Because that was exactly what it was, a project defense. Only the client bore the royal seal. Tevis listened. He took notes. He didn't interrupt. When the tour ended, they stood at the gate, and Tevis said he was impressed. That Havenrest was the only city of its size that hadn't lost a single resident in 3 months of war. That his report would be favorable. And then he said the most important part. The Royal Council was considering the possibility of transferring specialist Dane Corwell to the capital, Velgard, to work on fortifying the capital's walls under the direction of the Crown Engineering Corps. It wasn't a request, it was a notification, framed as a suggestion, wrapped in politeness. But the essence was simple. The Crown wants to take him, as a resource, as a tool, to send him to the capital, under control, under supervision, far from his own decisions and his own walls. Daniel was silent for 10 seconds. Then he replied. He said he was grateful for the recognition, that he understood the importance of the capital's fortifications, but that Havenrest lay in the path of the demon's main advance, and that an engineer leaving the city at this moment was tantamount to a death sentence for 300 residents and 200 refugees. That he was willing to share his blueprints and recommendations, but that he was staying. Tevis looked at him. His eyes were quick and sharp, calculating. Then he nodded. He said he would convey the answer. He mounted his horse and rode away. Elder Bolt approached Daniel when the dust from the hooves had settled. His hands were shaking. He said that Daniel had just refused the crown, that one doesn't do that, that the last man to refuse a royal inspector spent the rest of his life in the quarries. Daniel looked at him and said the quarries held no threat for him, because the crown couldn't afford to lose its only wall strengthener in the midst of war. They won't imprison him. They won't kill him. They'll try another way. He turned out to be right, but the other way came sooner than he expected. A week after the inspector's departure, 6 horsemen rode up to the city walls. Not soldiers, not royal guards. Mercenaries. Well armed, well equipped. They asked to stay in the city for the night. They said they were traveling south, ordinary travelers. Hana didn't believe it. She came to Daniel and said that 6 armed men on thoroughbred horses don't travel through border towns just for a place to sleep. They're here for something. Or for someone. Daniel agreed. He asked Hana to set up surveillance. 2 guards in plain clothes. Watch. Don't interfere. That night, one of the mercenaries left the tavern. He walked around the city, stopped at the house where Daniel lived, stood there. He looked at the windows. He left. In the morning, Hannah reported, mercenaries from the Duchy of Velmar. She recognized the patch on the saddle pad of one of the horses, the ducal stables. They didn't come to travel. They came for him. Daniel thought, Velmar, Duke Velmar, S rank, fire mage, the face of the crown. He had heard that name before, from the inspector, from refugees, from merchants. Duke Velmar is the strongest battle mage in the kingdom, commander of the Northern Front, a man who sincerely believes that wars are won by offensive classes and that defensive classes are mere servants. And now this man has sent mercenaries to a small border town to kidnap a 16-year-old boy with the wall fortifier class. Why? Not to use him, to control him, or to eliminate him. A wall fortifier who builds walls better than he attacks is a threat to Velmar's entire worldview. It is proof that one can win without attacking, that one can survive without killing. That strength is not just about fire and steel, and for a man who has built his entire career on the idea that attack is paramount, this is heresy. Daniel didn't wait. In the morning, he went out to the mercenaries in the tavern. He sat down at their table. They exchanged glances. A 16-year-old boy, skinny, short, unarmed, without armor. He looked at each of them. Then he said he knew where they were from. He knew why they had come, and that he had a proposal. They could go back to the Duke and say the boy wasn't worth the effort, that the city was small, the walls were ordinary, nothing interesting. Or they could try to take him. But then they'd have to get past the B-rank captain of the guard, past the A-rank sword mage of light, past the walls he had personally reinforced, and through a moat they won't be able to escape. The mercenaries were silent. The leader among them, a burly man with a scar across his eyebrow, looked at him appraisingly. Then he smirked and asked how the boy knew they were from the Duke. Daniel said that the patch on the saddle pad needs to be cut off if you want to travel incognito. The mercenary looked at his men. Then he stood up. He said they would leave in the morning. Daniel nodded and left. They left, but the problem didn't leave with them. Velmar knew about Haven Rest. He knew about Daniel. And the next attempt wouldn't involve just 6 mercenaries. That evening, Daniel stood on the tower and thought. The crown wants to take him. The Duke wants to eliminate him. The demons want to find him. 3 forces, 3 directions of pressure, all at once. He looked down at the city. Lights in the windows, smoke from the chimneys. Lila was carrying a basket across the square. Ari was sitting in the workshop, and the blue light of the runes could be seen flickering through the loophole. Reyna was cleaning her sword in the courtyard. Hannah was making her rounds. People. His people. No, not his. People who depended on his walls. He couldn't leave, couldn't give in, couldn't lose. Because if he lost, everyone would lose. He climbed down from the tower, went to the drafting table, and began to draw a new design. Not a wall, not a tower, a dome, a hemisphere over the city. He didn't know yet if he could do it, didn't know if he had enough level, mana, and understanding, but he began to calculate, because a good engineer doesn't start with construction. He starts with calculations. The 4th month. The city was growing, not outward, inward. Refugees kept coming, 5 to 10 people every day, sometimes 20, sometimes entire families with carts and livestock. By the middle of the 4th month, 600 people were already living in Haven Rest, twice as many as before the war. There wasn't enough space. There wasn't enough food. There was barely enough water. The wells were working at full capacity. Daniel was rebuilding the city, not just the walls, everything. He designed like an engineer. A city is a system. Water supply, sewage, warehouses, housing, evacuation routes. He drew at night and built by day. New houses were built right up against the inner side of the wall. The wall served as the back wall of the house, saving stone, saving space, and adding mass to the wall. Every house made it thicker and heavier. He designed the water supply system. 2 new wells drilled in places he found along the old channels of underground streams. Dane's memory suggested that the townspeople knew about the underground water, but didn't know exactly where to dig. Daniel knew. Structural diagnostics worked not only on stone. It sensed the density of the soil, voids, moisture. He found water at a depth of 12 meters. The 2 wells provided the town with twice as much water. Warehouses. He converted 3 empty houses into food storage facilities. Thick walls, cool air, ventilation through special channels in the masonry. Food kept longer. Losses from spoilage were reduced. Hana organized rationing. Strict, fair. The same for everyone. No more, no less. Everyone grumbled. Everyone obeyed, too, because Hana knew how to speak in such a way that disobedience never crossed anyone's mind. Leela worked non-stop. Her bakery fed the city. Bread twice a day, morning and evening. She kneaded dough from dawn. Her flour-covered hands were the first thing the workers saw when they came on shift, and the last thing they saw when they left. Daniel noticed that the bakery stood by the east wall. Thin, poorly insulated. It would be cold here in winter. The oven would heat the air, and the air would escape through the cracks. Wasteful. He went to Leela and told her he wanted to rebuild the bakery. She was surprised. He explained. The new bakery would be built into the wall. The oven would become part of the masonry. The heat from the oven would go into the stone. The stone would heat up and radiate heat in both directions. Into the bakery. And out. Into the wall. In winter, that section of the wall would be warm. Ice wouldn't form on the stone. The mortar wouldn't crumble from the frost. Lila's oven would help keep the city's defenses warm. She listened. Her eyes were wide open. Then she said quietly that no one had ever told her before that her oven could be important. Daniel replied that every part of the city was important, that a bakery wasn't just a place where bread was baked. It's a source of heat and energy and morale. People come for bread and see that the city is functioning, that someone is baking, that life goes on. It's more important than it seems. Lila was silent. Then she smiled, quietly and brightly, and said he was strange, that none of the 16-year-old boys talk like that. Daniel shrugged, said he had an unusual class. She laughed, briefly, for the first time in his presence. He had rebuilt the bakery in 6 days. The oven had become part of the wall. The stone mass around it was bound to the wall by structural binding. Ari had inscribed heat distribution runes on the stone surrounding the oven. Now the heat didn't rise up the chimney, but spread evenly through the stone. The bakery became as warm as a summer afternoon, even when cold rain was drizzling outside. And the section of wall above the bakery was warm to the touch. 20 meters of wall that wouldn't freeze in winter. Lila stood in the new bakery and touched the walls. Smooth, warm, clean. Then she touched the oven. Then she looked at Daniel, and her lips trembled, and she quickly turned away to the dough. He left. He had to work. 3 days after the bakery was rebuilt, What Daniel had been waiting for and fearing. They came. Not 14, not 20, not 50, more than 100. Daniel stood on the tower and counted. He stopped counting at 120. They were coming from the north, a dense mass, not running, walking, confidently. Among the ordinary horse-sized demons, 3 large ones moved, 3 times the size of the rest, armor on their backs, horns on their heads. Red eyes burned brighter and more viciously. Commanders, or like commanders. Kana stood nearby. She was counting. Then she said quietly that there were too many of them, that 40 guards and 12 militiamen wouldn't be able to hold the wall against 120 creatures, even with the moat, even with the towers, even with the barbican. Daniel didn't argue. He knew. But he had something he didn't have 3 months ago. A system. Level 17. Checkpoints all around the perimeter. 3-layered walls with runes. A barbican. A moat. And people who knew what to do. He turned to Hana and laid out the plan. Not to defend the entire perimeter evenly, to concentrate their forces. The northern wall, the most fortified, the thickest walls, the best runes, 2 pentagonal towers, a moat with a reverse slope. The demons will come from the north. They know the city is here. They'll go straight for it. Leave the southern, eastern, and western walls with minimal guard duty. Lookouts, not fighters. If the demons bypass the checkpoints, they'll signal where, and Hana will send in the reserves. Hana nodded. Sensible. Reyna stood at the foot of the tower, sword on her back. Her armor was on. She didn't ask for permission. She just stood there and waited. Daniel looked down at her. Then he nodded. She nodded back and walked toward the training yard. To take her position. Ari was in the workshop. Daniel went down to her. She already knew. She'd heard the guards' shouts. She'd seen the commotion. Her hands were shaking, but she was already laying out her tools. He said the barbican runes had to be ready for activation. 1 attempt. She nodded. She said she was ready. Her voice trembled. Her hands didn't. He returned to the wall. The demons were already at the moat. 100 dark figures stood at the edge and looked down. 8 red eyes on each face. They remembered. The 7 who had left had told them. The moat was a trap. They didn't climb over. Instead, 3 large ones stepped forward. Armored. Commanders. One of them opened its mouth. Daniel expected a roar. But the demon didn't growl. It exhaled. Black mist poured from its mouth and crept across the ground. Thick. Heavy. It flowed into the moat like liquid, filling it. The water in the moat hissed, bubbled, began to evaporate. Dark magic. Acidic. Corrosive. The moat filled with black mist, and the water within it vanished. Daniel sensed it through the control points. The stone at the bottom of the moat was beginning to crumble. The acid was eating away at it. Slowly but surely. If this continued, the moat would vanish in an hour. He clenched his teeth, placed his palms on the wall's parapet, activated stonework reinforcement 3. Not on the wall, on the moat. It extended 20 meters through magic, the radius limit. The stone at the bottom of the moat glowed. It strengthened. The acid continued to eat away at it, but more slowly. Much more slowly. The reinforced stone resisted. Ari, he shouted down. Ari ran out of the workshop. He asked if she had an anti-corrosion protection rune. She said she did, but to apply it, she'd have to go down into the moat, into the black mist. No, he wouldn't let her go down into the acid haze. Another plan. He told her to prepare the rune on a plate, a stone plate. He would form a block, she would apply the rune. He would throw the slab into the moat and activate it remotely. Ari ran to the workshop. Daniel formed a stone slab, flat, thin, the size of a palm. Ari returned 5 minutes later. The rune had been applied, quickly, precisely. The ink was still glistening. Daniel took the slab. He sensed the rune. Rune compatibility bound his magic to the rune. He threw the plate into the moat. It fell into the black mist. He reached for it through the control point, found it, activated it. The rune flashed. Blue light spilled across the bottom of the moat. The acid mist hissed. It began to retreat. It didn't disappear, but it retreated. It slowed. The stone stopped crumbling. Round 1. A draw. The demons stood and watched. The armored commander closed its mouth. The mist stopped flowing. They assessed the situation. They thought. Then they turned and headed for the gates. All 120 of them. Toward the gates. Toward the Barbican. Kana gave the order. Archers took up positions along the Barbican walls, spearmen behind the inner gates, Reyna at the training yard on the north side. If the demons broke through the gates, she would strike them inside. The demons approached the outer gate. The armored commander stood before them. He swung. He struck. The oak cracked. The iron strips bent. A second blow. The gate split open. The commander burst inside. The rest poured in behind him, into the Barbican corridor. Narrow, 10 meters, walls on both sides, loopholes. They crammed into the corridor, 20, 30, 40, pushing against each other, scratching the walls with their claws, rushing toward the inner gate. Hana waited. Daniel waited. When the corridor was filled to capacity, Hana gave the signal. The grate behind the demons fell, stone, heavy. It cut off their exit. Archers opened fire. Arrows flew through the embrasures on both sides, point blank, into the eyes, into the mouths, into the joints. Boiling tar poured down from above. The demons howled. For the first time in the entire battle, they made a sound. A howl. Low, vibrating. It made the stones ring. Daniel shouted to Ari, "Now!" She activated the runes. The corridor walls glowed red hot. The stone glowed red. The temperature inside the Barbican rose instantly. The air trembled. The demons' hides began to smoke. The smell. Burnt flesh and dark magic. Nauseating. 3 minutes. Arrows and resin and heat. 3 minutes. Then the armored commander struck the inner gate. The meter-thick stone slab shuddered. A crack ran across the surface. Daniel felt it through the control point. Pressure. Enormous. The creature struck with a force that could have breached a 2-meter-thick fortress wall. And he had a meter. With runes. With a clay cushion. But a meter. He placed his palms on the wall from the inside, near the gate, and poured everything he had left into it. Reinforcement, reinforcement, reinforcement. The crack froze. The stone hummed. The slab held. Outside, the armored commander struck again. The slab shook, but the crack didn't get any bigger. Another blow, and another. The stone held. Then the blows stopped. Daniel sensed it through the point. The commander had fallen. Arrows in the eyes. 7 arrows. 7 out of 8 eyes hit. Hana never misses. The battle lasted 40 minutes. When Hana opened the gate and the guards entered the Barbican, They counted 53 bodies, charred, pierced by arrows, motionless. Another 27 lay in front of the gates, killed by arrows from the towers while they waited their turn to enter the trap. One armored commander is dead in the corridor. The second is dead in front of the gates. Reyna killed him. She left the courtyard. She met him. 22 seconds, even for an armored one. The third commander was gone. With the remnants of the pack, about 30 creatures, they were running north, fast. Havenrest's casualties. 4 wounded, 1 seriously, burned by acid mist. The rest minor. Arrows, stones, bruises. Not a single death. Not a single one. Daniel sat on the ground by the inner gate, back to the wall. His palms were scraped raw, mana at 0. His body shook with violent tremors, but he sat there and stared at the barbican, at his barbican, which had just destroyed 80 demons and 2 armored commanders without a single casualty among the defenders. Hana approached. She stood beside him, silently. Then she sat down next to him, shoulder to shoulder. She reeked of sweat, resin, and blood. He reeked of sweat, chalk, and exhaustion. They sat in silence, watching the sunset through the gate's opening. Then Hana said quietly that she now believed in stones. The news had spread within a week. The border town of Havenrest had withstood an assault by 100 demons, without a single casualty. It was impossible. Towns with garrisons 3 times larger and walls twice as high had fallen overnight. But Havenrest stood. That changed everything. Refugees poured in like a river, not 5 or 10 a day, 30, 50, from all directions. People were heading to the only place on the map said to be survivable. By the end of the 4th month, 900 people were living in Havenrest. The wall could hold 300. The rest huddled in tents and shacks outside the perimeter. It was dangerous. Daniel hadn't slept in 2 days. He sketched. He calculated. He sketched again. He needed to expand the perimeter, to include the outlying settlements within the protection zone. But expansion meant more walls, more stone, more mana, more time. Time he didn't... He made a decision. Not to expand the circle. To add an outer ring, a second wall, lower than the main one, 3 meters instead of 5. Thinner, without the 3-layer construction. Simple reinforced masonry with basic runes. Not to stop an army, to slow it down and give people time to retreat behind the main wall. A buffer zone, 40 meters wide between the 2 walls. Fields, vegetable gardens, tents, housing for those who couldn't fit inside. When the alarm sounds, everyone retreats behind the main wall. The outer wall holds back the enemy, gives us 5 minutes, 10. Enough to save lives. Borges looked at the blueprints and whistled. He said it was 6 months' worth of work. Daniel said they had 2 months. Borges said it was impossible. Daniel said it was possible. If he made the blocks larger. If there were more workers. If they worked in 2 shifts, day and night. Borges looked at him and saw what he had seen more than once before. The eyes of a boy in which burned a fire not befitting a boy. The old master sighed. Then he said he would find people. Among the refugees were builders, bricklayers, carpenters, people who knew how to work with their hands. They had come here because it was safe. Now they could make that safety stronger. A week later, 120 people were working on the outer perimeter. Borges was in command. Daniel was forming blocks, 20 a day, 30. His body was getting used to it. His mana was growing. His level was rising. 18th, 19th, 20th. At the 20th level, what he had been waiting for opened up. Earth Formation 1 allows the creation and reinforcement of earthen structures, embankments, moats, mounds, earthen walls. It was a breakthrough. Until now, he had only worked with stone. Now he could work with earth. And there was plenty of earth around Havenrest. He stepped outside the wall, placed his palms on the ground. He activated it. The earth trembled. It compacted. It rose. A 1-meter-high embankment, solid as stone, tamped down by magic to the consistency of concrete. He stood there looking at this embankment and laughed, quietly, alone, because now he could build the outer wall 3 times faster. A stone foundation, earth on top, stone below, tamped earth on top, cheaper, faster, and strong enough for a buffer wall. 2 weeks, the outer ring was complete, 3 meters high, stone and earth, basic runes from Ari. The moat in front of it was shallower than the main one, a meter deep, but with the same reverse slope. 900 people now lived inside the double perimeter, the outer ring for living, the inner one for the last line of defense. Between them, fields with the first sprouts. Lila had planted wheat. One of the refugees had brought the seeds. Green shoots were pushing through the earth between the 2 walls. The city was breathing. In the middle of the 5th month, a letter arrived. Not from the crown, from the Mages Guild, an official one, with a seal. A red wax seal bearing the image of a 5-pointed star and crossed staffs. The village elder brought it to Daniel with trembling hands. Daniel read it. The Mages Guild expressed admiration for the achievements of wall fortifier Dane Corwell. The guild invited him to the annual Council of Classes in the capital, Velgard, to demonstrate his capabilities and discuss prospects for cooperation. Attendance was mandatory. Refusal would be considered disrespectful to the guild. An invitation that could not be refused. Daniel folded the letter. He placed it on the table. He looked at the headman. Then he said he wouldn't go. The headman turned pale. The Mages Guild isn't the crown. It's worse. The crown can send soldiers. The guild can send mages. And mages aren't mercenaries with swords. They're fire and lightning and spatial rifts. Daniel wrote a reply. Polite. Precise. He thanks them for the invitation. He appreciates the honor. But in wartime, it's impossible to leave a defensive post. He's ready to receive a representative of the guild in Havenrest and demonstrate the capabilities on site. If the guild wishes, he will provide a full report on fortification methods and blueprints for use in other cities. He sealed the letter, handed it to the town elder, told him to send it with the next merchant, and returned to work. Because there was more work than there were hours in the day. Level 22. New ability. Resonant Reinforcement 1. Allows him to reinforce structures through sound resonance. Voice activation instead of tactile. Maximum range, 10 meters. This meant he no longer needed to touch the wall. He could reinforce it with his voice while standing 10 meters away. This changed his tactics. During battle, he could stand on the tower and reinforce sections of the wall that were under pressure, without running to them, without pressing his palms against them, commanding with his voice. He trained. Every evening, he stood on the tower and activated reinforcement on different sections, with his voice, precisely, quickly. 10 meters isn't much, but it's a start. By the 22nd level, his mana had grown so much that he could work for 6 hours without a break. Before, he'd collapse after 2. His body was getting stronger, not from physical exercise, from magic. The system was reshaping him. His muscles were tightening, his endurance was growing. He was still a skinny 16-year-old boy, but a skinny boy who could work from dawn till dusk without collapsing. Sonha appeared on the 23rd day of the 5th month. Daniel didn't know her name then. He only knew that a girl was standing at the gate, small, dirty, with a knife in her hand, and behind her stood 7 children, even dirtier, even smaller. The youngest was about 4 years old. He was sitting on the ground, staring silently into space. He wasn't crying. Children who have been through hell don't cry. They fall silent. The guard called for Hannah. Hannah called for the village elder. The village elder called for Daniel. He came and saw them. 8 children, one of them with a knife. She stood in front of the others, between them and the world, a shield of bone and skin and fury, eyes dark, wild, alert. Scout class, D rank, 17 years old. She looked 14. She didn't say where they were from, didn't say how they got there, didn't say how many days they'd walked through the forest. She said only one thing. They needed a safe place for the children.
Daniel didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He didn't try to comfort her. He looked at the children, at the 4-year-old boy staring into space, at the 6-year-old girl with a burned hand, at the twins holding hands so tightly their knuckles had turned white. He turned to Hannah and said he needed an orphanage. Inside the main perimeter, in the most secure zone, near the main tower, with an underground passage to the cellars beneath the tower. A place from which the children could not be taken. Never. No matter what assault. Hannah nodded. She had seen the children too. Daniel built the orphanage in 3 days. He hadn't slept for those 3 days. Stone walls, thick, warm. Ari had inscribed runes of silence on the walls so the noise of the city wouldn't penetrate inside. A stove for heating. Windows with wooden shutters. An underground passage from the house's basement to the cellars of the main tower. Narrow. Low. For children. An adult demon couldn't squeeze through. At the end of the passage, a stone door with a lock that opens only from the inside. Sona stood and watched as he built. 3 days. She didn't help. She didn't get in the way. She just stood and watched, with a knife in her hand. When the house was ready, Daniel opened the door and stepped back. The children entered, slowly, carefully, like animals in a new burrow. The 4-year-old boy touched the wall. It was warm, and for the first time ever, his expression changed. He didn't cry. He just exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath for days and finally let it out. Sonha entered last. She stopped at the threshold. She looked at Daniel. The knife was still in her hand. She asked why. One word. He understood. Why was he building a house for other people's children? Why was he spending time and energy and mana on orphans when the walls weren't finished and demons were on the horizon? He answered, because walls aren't built for stone. Walls are built for people. She looked at him for a long time. Then she put the knife away, for the first time since she'd arrived. She didn't become his friend that day. She didn't start to trust him, but she stopped holding the knife. And that was the beginning. The 6th month began with silence. The demons didn't come. 5 weeks after the great assault, and not a single dark figure on the horizon. The silence was worse than the attack. The silence meant they were ready. Daniel used every day, level 25. New abilities grew like the branches of a tree. Each one opened up possibilities he couldn't have dreamed of a month ago. Spatial perception of structures, 1. He could sense the entire wall,
in its entirety, the entire perimeter, every stone, every rune, every crack, not through separate points, through a single field. The wall became his body. He knew where it hurt, knew where it pressed, knew where it was strong and where it was weak. Mana fully regenerated in 4 hours. His body had grown stronger. He no longer collapsed after work. He could stand. He could think. He could work some more. Ari had finished the runic covering of the inner perimeter, all 4 walls, all 4 towers, the barbican, the underground counterwalls, the full set. Thermal protection, anti-corrosion, shock-absorbing, dark magic dissipation. She did the last one without moon salt. She found a substitute. Crystallized dew collected at dawn from stones that Daniel had reinforced with magic. The stones, imbued with his mana, released moisture with special properties. Ari discovered this by accident. She was wiping down a stone in the workshop and noticed that the rag glowed. 3 days of experiments. And the dissipation rune worked, not as powerfully as with moon salt, 60%, but it worked. She came to Daniel with the results. Her eyes burned behind her glasses. She spoke quickly and didn't stutter. She waved her arms about. She nearly knocked over her own table. He listened and watched her, and thought she was beautiful when she spoke of runes. Not the kind of beauty that catches the eye, a quiet beauty, like the light of a lamp in the workshop late at night. He pushed the thought away. He was 29, she was 19. Here, he was in the body of a 16-year-old. The lines were blurred, and this was dangerous territory. He said the results were impressive, that she had made a breakthrough. She adjusted her glasses and said quietly that these were his stones, his magic. She just noticed. He replied that noticing it was half the discovery. She blushed to the roots of her hair and went into the workshop. Reyna, meanwhile, had become a different person. Not a new one, her old self. Every day she went out through the courtyard. Every day she returned. At first she killed 1 or 2 lone demons, then 5 on a single sortie, then 10. Her skills were returning, an A-rank Swordmaster of Light in top form. She moved in a way that took the guard's breath away from the tower. Light ran along the blade in golden flashes, every strike precise, every movement economical, not a single superfluous gesture. She killed in silence, without screams, without rage, with the cold concentration of a surgeon. And every evening she returned across the courtyard, placed her palm on the stone of the wall, and stood there for a second. A ritual. Her ritual. In the 2nd week of the 6th month, Daniel descended into the cellars beneath the main tower. He did this regularly, checking the foundation, reinforcing the base. The tower was the highest point in the city and bore the greatest load. This time he went deeper, below the foundation, below the underground counterwalls, below the level at which he was building, into the bedrock, a lantern in his hand, a narrow passage. He had been digging this passage for a week, at night, alone. He didn't tell anyone, because he sensed it. His spatial perception was showing him something, deep down, beneath the city. An unevenness, a void. Something that was not stone, nor earth, nor water. He descended to a depth of 8 meters and stopped. The wall before him was not made of Havenrest stone, a different stone, dark, smooth, polished. And there were runes on it. Not Ari runes, others. Old ones, very old ones. The lines had faded with time, but were still legible. Daniel brought the lantern closer. The runes covered the entire surface of the wall, hundreds, thousands. A pattern he couldn't read, but could sense through perception. These runes were alive, not dead symbols on dead stone. Alive. They pulsed, slowly, barely perceptibly, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. He placed his palm on the wall. The system responded instantly, not with text, with a sensation. Ancient structure. Class. Wall fortifier. Level. Undefined. Age. Approximately 200 years. Condition. Damaged. Function. Ceiling. 200 years. Ceiling. Someone built a wall here 200 years ago. Not up above, below, deep down, beneath the city. And that someone was a wall fortifier. The class wasn't new. The class existed before him, long ago. And that predecessor sealed something. What? Daniel stood before the wall and sensed it. Damaged. The word pulsed red. The wall was weakening. It had held for 2 centuries, but it was holding less and less. Cracks in the runes, breaches in the pattern. Time was eating away at it, just as the acid mist ate away at the stones in the moat. Slowly, relentlessly. He withdrew his hand. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back upstairs. In the morning, he went to Ari. He asked her to come down with him. She came down. She saw the runes, and fell silent for 3 minutes. Then she began to speak, quickly, disjointedly, without stuttering. She recognized the style, an ancient runic language, pre-guild, the one that existed before the formation of the Mages Guild, before the system. No, not before the system, before the system became widely known. 200 years ago, when classes had only just appeared. Sealing runes. She said it was a seal. Powerful. Colossal. On a scale she had never seen before. Whoever built this had poured enough mana into the wall to build an entire city. She asked what was behind it. Daniel said he didn't know, but he could feel it. Something big. Something oppressive. Something that wanted to get out. She turned pale. Then she said quietly that she needed to study the runes. All of them. Every single one. To understand the structure of the seal and assess the extent of the damage. It would take time. Weeks. Maybe months. Daniel nodded. He said they had time, as long as the wall held. He was lying. He didn't know how long the wall would hold. But he knew something else. Havenrest didn't stand on this spot by accident. The city was built over the seal. 200 years ago, someone built the first house here. Then a second. Then a 10th. The city grew over the sealed abyss. And no one knew. No one remembered. 200 years of oblivion. He stepped out onto the wall. He looked down at the city from above. Houses. Streets. People. Lila was carrying bread. Borges was yelling at the apprentices. The children from the orphanage were playing in the courtyard under Sonhi's watchful eye. Reyna was cleaning her sword in the courtyard. Hana was making her rounds. An ordinary day. An ordinary city. Above the abyss. He clenched his fists, then unclenched them, then went down to the drafting table. He opened his notes on the dome, and began counting again. Because now the dome was not just protection from above. The dome was supposed to enclose the city on all sides, including from below. In the 3rd week of the 6th month, a carriage arrived in Havenrest. Not a military one, not a royal one, a lacquered one, black with a golden coat of arms on the door, the coat of arms of the Dukes of Velmar. A young woman stepped out of the carriage, tall, slender, blonde hair styled in a way they don't style it in the border towns. A dress made of fabric that cost more than the entire wardrobe of Havenrest put together. Gloves, earrings, a faint smile, eyes cold and watchful, like a cat's before pounce. Malin Oro, daughter of the Duke of Velmar. She arrived with an entourage of 2 maids and a letter from the capital's Committee on Refugee Affairs, an official mission, assessment of living conditions for displaced persons, assistance in organizing supplies, charity. Mayor Bolt welcomed her with open arms. The Duke's daughter in his city. It's an honor, it's money, it's patronage. He gave her the best house in town, his own. He moved in with his brother. Hannah came to Daniel that very hour. She said one word: spy. Daniel nodded. He knew. The daughter of Duke Velmar is arriving in the city her father tried to rob 2 months ago. It can't be a coincidence. She's here to watch, to listen, to report, to look for weaknesses. In the walls, in the people, in him. Hannah suggested expelling her. Daniel said no. To expel the Duke's daughter would be to give Velmar a pretext, an official pretext for hostile action, an insult to a noble lady on a charitable mission. That could not be allowed. Instead, he suggested something else. He went to Malin himself. She had settled into the mayor's house. Maids were unpacking her things. There were a lot of things, too many for a charitable mission. Daniel knocked. He entered. Malin was sitting at the table, drinking tea from a porcelain cup she had brought with her. She looked up. She saw him, a boy in dirty pants and chalk on his fingers. She smiled, politely and venomously. She said she'd heard all about the young hero of Haven Rest and was glad to meet him in person. Daniel sat down across from her, without being invited. She raised an eyebrow. He said he knew who she was, knew whose daughter she was, and knew why she'd come. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes changed. For a second. For a moment. Something flashed behind the cold facade. Surprise. Or interest. He continued. He said she could look. They had nothing to hide. The walls are visible from the outside. The towers are visible from the outside. The moat is visible from the outside. Everything he built stands in the open. He doesn't hide his methods. He doesn't hide his blueprints. If her father wants to know how to defend the city, he can simply ask. Daniel will share, for free. Because every defended city means one less dead village. Malin was silent. The cup froze halfway to her lips. Then she set the cup down. The smile vanished. For the first time during the entire conversation, she looked at him without a mask. She said quietly that he didn't look like a 16-year-old. He shrugged, said he was in an unusual class. She almost smiled, almost for real. Then the mask returned, and she said she'd be happy to take a tour. He showed her around the city, showed her the walls, the towers, the moat, the barbican, explained how each element worked, without hiding anything, without embellishing. Malin listened. She asked questions, smart questions. Not the kind a spy asks to find a weakness, the kind asked by someone who's genuinely interested. She asked why the tower was pentagonal. He explained. She asked why there was clay between the layers of stone. He explained. She asked how the runes interacted with the magical reinforcement. He called Ari, and Ari explained, at length, with formulas. Malin listened to Ari without interrupting or getting bored. At the end of the tour, they stood on the main tower. Malin looked down at the city from above, at the fields between the walls, at the children at the orphanage, at the smoke from Lila's bakery. She said that none of this existed in the capital, that in the capital, the walls are tall and beautiful and absolutely useless, that in the capital, no one builds an orphanage next to the main tower. In the capital, Orphans are sent beyond the walls, far away, so they won't get in the way. Her voice was steady, but something in it trembled. Daniel said nothing. She went downstairs. She went into the headman's house, and that night, for the first time, she didn't write a letter to her father. She wrote every evening, Hannah checked.
A maid took the letters to the post station outside the city. That night, the maid was out of a job. Instead of a letter, Maylin took out a book. She sat by the window and read until dawn. Daniel found out about it in the morning from Hannah and smiled. Maylin lived in the city for a week, then a second, then a third. She didn't leave. The letters to her father grew shorter, less frequent, more terse. She walked around town, talked to people, to refugees, to Lila, to Sonia's children. She took off her gloves on the third day, her earrings on the fifth. She changed into a simple dress on the 8th. By the end of the third week, she looked like a city woman. Only her posture gave her away. Straight, aristocratic. You can't get rid of that. Daniel watched. He saw her changing, slowly, layer by layer, like plaster crumbling from an old wall, exposing the stone, real stone. Hidden beneath the varnish and gold and poisonous smiles was a girl who stole books at night. He found out by accident. He was walking past the city library, a small room in City Hall, 50 books. He saw a light. He peeked inside. Maylin was sitting on the floor in her nightgown, reading by candlelight. Open books lay scattered around her. She didn't hear him. She was too engrossed. He stood in the doorway. He looked at her, at the girl without a mask, without a dress, without a surname, just a person who loves books. He left quietly, and the next day, he began designing a library, a real one. Not a small room in City Hall, a space at the base of the South Tower, stone walls, dry air, proper lighting, shelves, a reading nook by the window. He built it in 5 days. He didn't tell Maylin. He didn't tell anyone. He just opened the door and carried the books in. Maylin found the library on her own, that same evening. Daniel was on the wall when he heard a sound from below, a quiet one. He looked down. Maylin was standing in the doorway of the library, alone, without the maids, without a mask. She stood there looking at the shelves, at the light streaming in from the window, at the stone reading table, and she was crying, silently, without a sound. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away, because she didn't know anyone was watching. Daniel turned away. It wasn't meant for his eyes. 2 days later, she came to him, in the afternoon, in front of people, with dry eyes and her back straight. She said the library was beautiful, that she wanted to help, that she had connections in the capital and could get books, lots of books. Daniel said he'd be happy to. She nodded. She turned around, took 3 steps, stopped, turned back, and asked quietly why he had done it. He replied that he had noticed she loved to read. She looked at him, for a long time, as if at a riddle she couldn't solve. Then she left. That evening she wrote a letter to her father, a short one. Hannah intercepted a copy, brought it to Daniel. He read it. The letter contained 3 lines. The city is fortified. There is no threat to the crown. I'll be back in a month. In a month. Not in a week as planned. She was buying herself time. Time in the city where someone had built a library for her simply because they noticed she loved books. The 7th month. A siege. A real one. Not a raid. Not a reconnaissance mission. 3 days of hell. They came at dawn on the first day. Daniel sensed them through spatial perception before he saw them. The ground was shaking. Hundreds of legs, thousands of claws. He stood on the main tower and looked north. The horizon was black, not from smoke, from bodies. A solid mass. A dark wave, moving slowly, inevitable, like a tide. Hana was counting. She stopped at 300, then started again. Stopped at 500. There were more. Maybe 800, maybe 1,000. Among the ordinary creatures, armored ones moved. 20, 30. And behind them all walked one. Huge. Taller than the walls, taller than the towers. A black silhouette against the backdrop of the dawn sky. Horns like trees. 6 eyes burned not red, purple. The Demon Lord. Hana said one word, quietly, almost a whisper. That was it. Daniel looked at her, then at the demon army, then at his city, at the walls he'd spent 7 months building, at the towers, at the moat, at the barbican, at the people running to their positions, guards, militiamen, refugees who had taken up arms because there was nowhere left to run. 110 fighters, against 1,000 beasts and the Demon Lord. He turned to Hana and laid out the plan, the same one as during the last assault. Concentrate on the north, all forces to the northern wall. The barbican is ready, the moat is ready, the towers are ready, the runes are ready. There's one difference. This time, he won't conserve mana. Everything he has, every last drop, because if the wall doesn't hold, there'll be no point in conserving it. Hana nodded. She gave the orders. The men moved quickly, without panic. 7 months of drills, 7 months of preparation. Everyone knew their place. Everyone knew their task. Reyna stood by the training yard, sword drawn. Light ran along the blade. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't trembling. For the first time in a year, she stood before a battle and didn't tremble. Ari sat in the workshop. The runes were ready for activation. All layers: thermal, anti-corrosion, shock-absorbing, dark magic dispersion. Her hands were completely still. Sona sat on the roof of the orphanage, with a homemade bow. She could see everything. The children were below, in the basement, in the underground passage. The youngest, a 4-year-old boy, was asleep. He was used to falling asleep when he was scared. Lila stood in the bakery. The oven was burning. The bread was baking. She didn't turn off the oven. People would return from battle hungry, and will need bread. Mei Lin stood on the south wall, alone, unarmed, unarmored. She looked north and clutched her father's seal in her hand, the golden seal of Duke Velmar, which she had brought with her as a symbol of his authority and his command. She clutched it and thought. The demons struck at noon, in full force, along the entire length of the northern wall, simultaneously. The first wave plunged into the moat, a gentle slope, mud, water, the back slope. They slid to the bottom and scrambled up toward the wall. Archers in the towers opened fire. Arrows flew continuously. Every second, every arrow hit its mark. Kana gave the orders. Her voice was steady, clear. No shouting. Sectors. Shift fire. Reload. Next. The demons were climbing. Some fell. The next ones climbed over them, over the bodies of the dead. The moat filled with corpses. The corpses became a bridge. An hour later, the moat ceased to be an obstacle. The northern section was littered with bodies. The demons climbed over them toward the wall. Claws scraped against the stone. Runes flashed. Thermal protection heated the surface. Their hides smoked, but they kept climbing. The armored ones slammed into the wall. A direct hit. Daniel felt it through perception. Pressure. Monstrous. The first layer of stone cracked. The clay cushion compressed, absorbed the blow. The inner layer held. The wall stood firm. The armored one struck again. The crack widened. Daniel activated amplification. With his voice, from the tower, 6 meters. The crack closed. The armored one struck a third time. A new crack. Amplification. It closed. A fourth blow. A fifth. A sixth. Every blow a crack. Every crack, amplification. Daniel held the wall as one holds a wounded man, healing the wounds faster than they were inflicted. Mana flowed from him like a river, unceasingly. He felt his reserves running dry. An hour, 2, 3. By the end of the first day, the mana was gone. He sat on the tower and could not move. The wall stood, battered, cracked, but it stood. The demons retreated, for the night. They did not leave. They retreated. They stood outside the moat and waited. The demon lord stood behind them, motionless, watching. He hadn't entered the battle yet. He was waiting. At night, Daniel restored his mana. 4 hours until full capacity. He didn't sleep. He lay on the tower's stone, gazed at the sky, and felt the mana returning, drop by drop, drop by drop. By dawn, he was up. Mana full, body broken, but mana full. The second day was worse. The demons changed tactics. No longer charging head-on, they flanked. The western wall, the eastern, simultaneously. Hana was shuffling people around, running, along the walls, 10 to the west, 10 to the east, 20 to the north. A close call. A deadly close call. Reyna went out through the courtyard, alone, against a group of 30 creatures on the western flank. She fought for 40 minutes, killed 19. The rest retreated. She returned covered in blood. Not her own. Almost not her own. A cut on her thigh. Deep. She bandaged it herself, drank some water, went out again. The eastern flank. Another 20 minutes. Another 11 dead demons. She returned and sat down by the wall. She couldn't stand up. Her muscles were failing her. But she was smiling. A vicious, snarling smile. Because for the first time in a year, she wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for the wall behind her, for the people behind the wall, for the courtyard that the young engineer had built for her. And the wall stood. The second day was over. The wall stood. The western section was damaged, 3 cracks. Daniel had patched them up overnight. The eastern section was intact. The northern section was battered but holding. Casualties. 2 killed. Guards. 1 fell from the wall when the armored one struck the base. The second was taken by a demon that climbed over the parapet. Hana killed the creature with a spear to the throat. But she didn't manage to save the guard. 2 names. Havenrest's first deaths in 7 months. Daniel stood over the bodies, silent. Then he returned to the wall, because the third day was already beginning. The third day. The demon lord had entered the fray. He approached the northern wall, slowly. Every step shook the ground. He was enormous. 8 meters tall, armor on his body like a crab's, horns curved forward, 6 violet eyes. He stopped in front of the wall, looked at it, then raised a paw
and struck. Not like the armored ones, not with a battering ram, with magic. A black wave surged from its paw and struck the wall. Daniel felt it, with his whole body. The wall screamed, not with a sound, with a sensation. Pain. The stone was screaming in pain. Dark magic was eating away at it. The runes flared, dispelling dark magic. 60% power. The remaining 40% went through. The outer layer of stone began to crumble, not crack, crumble, fall apart, like sand. Daniel poured mana, reinforcement, maximum. The stone strengthened, but the demon lord struck again, and again, and again. Each blow chipped away a layer. The first layer of stone, a clay cushion. The second layer of stone, the demon lord was working his way toward the heart of the wall, methodically, patiently, like a surgeon cutting through flesh to reach the bone. Daniel stood on the tower, holding the wall, and felt it dying beneath his hands, sector by sector, layer by layer. Mana flowed, and he knew it wouldn't be enough. Not for 3 hours, not for 2, maybe for 1. Then the wall would fall, and everything behind it. Lila, Ari, the children, everyone. Then Mei Lin appeared beside him. He hadn't heard her climb the tower. She stood there, pale, in a simple dress, her hair disheveled. Her eyes were huge. She was looking at the wall crumbling under the demon lord's blows, and in her hand was her father's seal. She said she wanted to help. Daniel looked at her, at the wall, at his hands pressed against the stone, at the mana he had left for 30 minutes. And he did something he had never done before. He took her hand, pressed it against the wall, next to his own, palm to palm, stone between them. He said, "Help me. Just think about what's inside, about who you want the wall to protect." Mei Lin closed her eyes. She thought of the library, about the books, about Lila, who brought her bread every morning, about Sonia's children, about quiet evenings by the window, about how, for the first time in her life, someone saw her as a person and not a tool. The wall flared up, golden, warm, not hot, warm, like the light of the morning sun. The system responded. Text appeared before Daniel's eyes. Resonant amplification, dual operator, compatibility, confirmed. Mei Lin's mana surged into the wall through his hand. Not much. She wasn't a builder, but she was an illusionist. Her mana was different, light, fluid. It filled the cracks that his heavy builder's mana couldn't seal, like water filling the crevices in stone. The wall glowed, along its entire length. Golden light ran through the runes, amplified them. The dissipation runes flared at full power, 100%. More, 120. The demon lord's dark magic struck the wall and dissipated. All of it. Completely. The stone stopped crumbling. The demon lord struck again. The wall didn't budge. Again, the wall stood. He struck a 3rd time, a 5th, a 10th time. The wall stood. The golden light burned. Mei Lin trembled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But she didn't pull her hand away. She held on. Daniel held on. Together. The demon lord stopped. 6 violet eyes stared at the wall, at the light, at the two people on the tower whose palms were pressed against the stone. He stood there for a long time, a minute, two. Then he turned, slowly, and headed north. The remnants of the army trailed behind him, maybe 200 creatures, out of 1,000. They were leaving, silently, just as they had come. Mei Lin took her hand off the wall. She looked at her palm, then at Daniel, then at her father's seal, which lay on the stone parapet. She picked up the seal, looked at it, and broke it in two. The gold cracked with a soft ring. She placed the shards on the stone and said she was no longer a spy. Daniel nodded. He knew. 3 months had passed since the siege. The 9th, the 10th, the 11th. Havenrest had become something else. Not a town. A node. The first node in the network Daniel had been building in his mind from day one. The population had surpassed 2,000. The double perimeter had been expanded. The outer ring had been reinforced to the level of the former main wall. The wall had become a fortress. 5 meters thick, 6 meters high, a 3-layer structure, a full set of runes, 8 towers instead of 4, crossfire coverage every meter along the perimeter. Level 30, abilities that seemed impossible 6 months ago. Mass formation. Daniel could create a wall 50 meters long in a single day. Remote reinforcement 3, 100-meter radius, voice activation. He could stand in the center of the city and reinforce any point along the perimeter. Spatial perception 2. He sensed not only the walls, he sensed the ground 200 meters around. Every stone, every void, every movement. But he didn't stay in the city. He went beyond its limits. A network of satellite villages. 5 villages within a 20-kilometer radius of Havenrest. Each received a wall. Not like the one in the city. Simpler. Basic. A stone foundation. An earthen top. A moat. 2 towers. Enough to withstand a small raid and give people time to flee to Havenrest along a fortified road. Roads. That was Hana's idea. She said that walls without roads are islands, beautiful and useless. If a village cannot quickly send people to the fortress when, the village wall simply prolongs the agony. Daniel agreed. He built roads. Not ordinary ones, fortified ones, with stone walls on either side, 1.5 meters high, enough to shield people on the move from attacks from the flanks. A small tower every 500 meters, a watchtower, with loopholes. Signal fires on each one. When the alarm sounds, the fires are lit, and Havenrest sees where the threat is coming from. The whole town built the roads, hundreds of people, masoners, diggers, apprentices. Borges commanded the construction crews like a general commands an army. He wheezed, he cursed, he drove them on, and every evening he came to Daniel and nodded silently. Done. Next section. The conflict with Duke Velmar had reached a new level. After Mei Lin's escape following the siege, when she did not return to the capital, the Duke flew into a rage. His daughter had remained in the enemy city, betrayed him, defected to the side of the boy fortifier. For Velmar, this was a personal insult worse than a military defeat. He declared Daniel a threat to the balance of classes, officially, at the Council of Kings. He stated that the wall fortifier was undermining the foundations of social order, that elevating the defensive class to the level of state power set a dangerous precedent, that if every city started building walls instead of training offensive mages, the kingdom would lose its military might. The council listened. Some counselors nodded. Some remained silent. Some exchanged glances, because they all knew one simple thing. Havenrest stands, and the cities that relied on offensive mages lie in ruins. But Velmar was S rank, the kingdom's strongest combat mage, His word carried weight. His army carried weight. His fire carried weight. Daniel had learned this from the merchants. News traveled slowly, but it got through. He sat in the tower and thought. Velmar won't stop. Political pressure is the first step. Then comes military pressure. Then personal pressure. An S-rank fire mage at the walls of Havenrest. The wall withstood the demon lord. Will it withstand Velmar? He didn't know. But he knew he had to prepare. The dome. The project he'd been working on since the 6th month. In secret. At night. The calculations filled 3 thick notebooks. A hemisphere over the city. An energy barrier in the shape of a wall. The dome is a wall from above. The system must accept it as a wall, because he would define it as a wall. The blueprint as a spell, the definition as a key. But the dome demanded a level he didn't yet possess, and mana he wouldn't have enough of. Alone. He remembered the night on the tower when Meilin pressed her palm against the stone. A dual operator. The system accepted 2. What if there were more of them? Not 2. 6. He began speaking to each one, separately, quietly, carefully. Not as a plan, as a question. Lila. Could she think about what she was protecting when she touched the wall? Lila was surprised. Then she tried it. She placed her hand on the bakery wall. She thought about bread, about warmth, about the people waiting for breakfast. The stone grew slightly warmer beneath her palm. Slightly, barely noticeable. But Daniel sensed it through perception. She could. Hana. She wasn't surprised. She placed her hand on the wall and thought about her father, about the wall that hadn't held, about the wall that must hold. The stone beneath her palm hummed, low, heavy, like a war drum. Ari. She placed her hand on the wall, and the runes around it flared brighter. Her mana flowed into the stone and amplified every rune within a 5-meter radius. She gasped and laughed. Reyna! She placed her hand on the wall, and light ran through the stone. Golden. Pure. The light of the sword mistress of light. It didn't fortify the stone. It illuminated it. From within. The stone glowed. The wall glowed, like a lighthouse. Sona. She pressed her palm against the orphanage wall, and the stone grew quieter. The sounds from outside vanished. Absolute silence. The rune of silence that Ari had cast was amplified 10-fold. Sona the scout. She knew how to hide, and the wall hid along with her. Meilin. She already knew. She had already done this. Her illusions flowed into the stone, and the wall began to shimmer, to blur. The enemy could not tell exactly where the stone ended and the air began. The wall became a mirage, a real mirage, solid yet invisible. 6 of them. Each gave the wall something of their own. Warmth, strength, light, silence, illusion, knowledge of the runes, and his mana bound it all into a single whole. Daniel stood on the tower, looking at his notes, and realized that the dome was possible. Not by his strength alone, by their combined strength. Year 1. The End. Ari had deciphered the runes beneath the city. 3 months of work, hundreds of hours in the dungeon by lantern light. Her eyes were red from strain. She'd changed her glasses twice. She came to Daniel at night, woke him up. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from what she had discovered.
She said there was a rift beneath the city, sealed 200 years ago by another wall fortifier. His seal keeps the rift closed, but the seal is crumbling, slowly, a millimeter a year. In 5 or 10 years, it will crumble, and the rift will open. Not like the ones in the north. This one was the first, the oldest, the deepest. If it opens, what emerges won't be a swarm or an army. What emerges will be the thing that created all demons, the source. Daniel sat on the bed and listened. Then he asked if there was a way to restore the seal. Ari said there was, theoretically. A new wall fortifier could place a new seal over the old one. But to do that requires a level Daniel hadn't reached yet. And mana, that wouldn't be enough, even at level 35. Daniel nodded. Then he asked something else. Why was the wall fortifier class considered trash, if 200 years ago it had saved the world? Ari fell silent. Then she said quietly that she'd found something else. Information was woven into the runes of the seal. Not text, structure, the stone's memory. That first wall reinforcer left a message. It was simple. The class must be forgotten, intentionally, because if anyone finds out there's a rift beneath the city, those who want to open it will come, to use it, to control it. The class of the fortifier was deliberately degraded. 200 years of propaganda, 200 years of ridicule, 200 years of shame, so that no one would seek a new fortifier, so that no one would come to Haven Rest, so that the seal would sleep in silence. Daniel sat and said nothing. 200 years. The boy Dane Corwell received the class and, out of shame, smashed his head against a rock. Because for 200 years, someone had made sure that this class was a disgrace. So that no bearer would want to develop it. So that no bearer would reach the level that would allow the seal to be restored. A perfect trap. Protection through humiliation. He stood up, went out onto the wall, looked at the city in the darkness. Lights in the windows, silence, a peaceful night. Over the rift, he stood there and thought about the man who had stood in this very spot 200 years ago. A different body, a different name, the same class, the same choice. Seal it and leave, or seal it and stay. The first one sealed it and left, and everything he built began to crumble, because walls die without a builder. Daniel returned to the room. He sat down at the table. He opened the notebook with the dome's calculations and began to calculate anew, because now the dome was meant to cover not only the sky, it was meant to cover the earth. A shell, a sphere, complete. Top and bottom, a city inside the sphere, a rift inside the sphere, sealed twice, with the old seal and the new one. He told only Ari and Hana about the rift, no one else. Not yet. Not because he didn't trust them, because he didn't want panic, because people have to live. Calm, normal. Bake bread, raise children. Repair roofs, live. He would give them a life, a calm and normal one, and he would seal the rift himself, with the help of 6 others. But Velmar didn't give him time. The news came via a runner, a boy from a satellite village to the south. He had run 5 kilometers without stopping and stumbled through the gate, wheezing and gasping for breath. The army. From the south, 12,000. Duke Velmar's banners. A 3-day march. Hannah stood on the tower and looked south. Then she turned to Daniel. Her face was stony. She said that 12,000 was twice the entire population of Havenrest, that the walls could withstand an assault by 1,000 demons, but 12,000 men with siege engines and an S-rank fire mage at their head was a different matter. Men are smarter than demons. Men build ladders. They dig tunnels. They negotiate. They bribe. They poison wells. This isn't a siege. It's a war. And then the second piece of news came, from the north. Sonha saw it first. She always saw it first. Dust on the horizon. Black. Heavy. Familiar. Demons. A huge wave, more than last time. 1,000. Maybe 1,500. And behind the army, a figure. Huge. Familiar. The Demon Lord. He's back. The south. Velmar with an army of 12,000. North. The Demon Lord with 1,500 creatures. Havenrest between them. Hammer and anvil. Or a trap someone had planned. Daniel stood on the tower and looked south, then north, then down, at the city, at the people, at the walls he'd spent a year building, at the towers, at the Barbican, at Lila's bakery, smoke rising from its chimney, at the orphanage by the main tower, at Reyna's courtyard, at Ari's workshop, at Maylin's library. Every building, every stone, every name. He had built all of this. For them. For each of them. And now 2 armies were marching to destroy it. He closed his eyes. He counted. Mana, level, capabilities, the dome, calculations. 6 operators, everything he had prepared, everything he had built, everything he knew. He opened his eyes. He looked at Hannah and said 2 words. I'm ready. Morning. Dawn. Golden light flooded Havenrest. Daniel stood on the main tower. Beneath his feet, the stone he had reinforced with his own hands. All around him was the city he had built. Below him were the people he was defending. Everything he had been working toward for 12 months converged at a single point. On this morning, at this hour. Dust rose from the south. 12,000 men in formation. Cavalry, infantry, siege towers, trebuchets. And at the very front, riding a black horse, a figure in a cloak of dragon scales. Duke Velmar, S-rank, fire mage, the face of the crown. He rode without haste. He knew there was no need to hurry. The city was trapped. A dark wave was coming from the north. 1,500 demons. The ground shook beneath their footsteps. Behind them, the Demon Lord, the same one, 6 violet eyes, horns like trees. He too was in no hurry. 2 enemies, 2 armies, 1 goal. Daniel watched them and breathed evenly. 6 people stood nearby. Lila, in an apron, bread in her hands, still warm, fresh from the oven. She had baked it that morning, because after the battle, people would be hungry. She didn't say anything grand. She just baked bread, like every morning. Hannah, a spear in her hand. Not hers, her father's. She had traveled to the ruins of the neighboring city to find it, a 3-day journey. Alone. She found it among the rubble of the wall that had killed him. The shaft was cracked.
She had replaced it. The tip was intact. For 3 years she had carried it with her and never once used it in battle. Today she held it as one holds a banner. Ari, a scroll in her hand, the final rune. She had worked on it for a month, a rune of full resonance, theoretical, never tested. She didn't know if it would work, but she believed. Not in the rune, in the stone beneath her feet, in the man who had fortified that stone. Reyna, sword in hand, for the first time in a year, without a tremor. Light ran down the blade in golden rivers. She stood straight, feet wide apart, ready. Not to flee, to fight. She would not run, never again, because behind her was a wall, and that wall would not fall. Sona, at the edge of the tower, with a bow, with a map. She had marked on the map every path, every ravine, every hollow within a 10-kilometer radius of the city, the positions of both armies, their directions of movement, their weak points. She saw everything, as a scout sees. Mei Lin, without gloves, without earrings, without her father's seal, her hands empty, her eyes dry. She stood and looked at her father's army, at the banners under which she had grown up, at the people she knew by name. She had chosen a side, and she stood by it. Daniel looked at each of them, one by one. Lila, Hana, Ari, Reyna, Sonia, Mei Lin. 6 people, 6 stories, 6 wounds sealed in stone. He nodded. Then he placed his palm on the tower's stone. Beneath his palm lay a blueprint. 9 months of work, every night, every spare minute. Lines and calculations and formulas that no one in this world but him understood. A dome, not a hemisphere, a sphere. A complete shell, above the city and beneath the city. A wall on all sides, a wall as defined by the system. He designated it as a wall. He specified it in the blueprint. Every element, every curve, every node. He activated the blueprint. The system responded. Text appeared before his eyes. Protective dome, level 1. Mana required. Exceeds individual reserve. Required. Additional sources. Daniel wasn't surprised. He knew. That's why they were here. All 6 of them. He held out his hands. Lila placed her palm on his left hand. Warm, in agony, small. Hana placed her hand over Lila's palm. Firm, calloused from the spear. Ari placed hers, slender fingers stained with ink, trembling, but precise. Reyna, the broad palm of a swordswoman, from the light that ran across her skin. Sonha, small, tenacious, cold, the palm of a scout accustomed to clinging to branches and rocks. Mei Lin, the last. She placed her hand and looked Daniel in the eyes. No mask, no smile, no venom, just her. 7 hands on the stone. Daniel closed his eyes. He could feel them, every one. Lila's mana, warm, soft, smelling of bread and yeast, the mana of life, the mana of home. Hana's mana, heavy, steely, the mana of a warrior, the mana of duty, the mana of a father's spear and a wall that must not fall. Ari's mana, light, ringing, the mana of runes, the mana of knowledge, the mana of precise lines and perfect formulas. Reyna's mana, hot, golden, the manna of light, the manna of the sword, the manna of a man who has stopped running. Sonhi's manna, quiet, almost invisible, the manna of shadows, the manna of silence, the manna of the 7 children sleeping in the basement who know no fear because the walls around them are impenetrable. Malin's manna, fluid, shifting, the manna of illusions, the manna of truth hidden behind lies, the manna of the girl who broke her father's seal for the sake of the library. 6 streams, all different, all real. He gathered them, twisted them like a rope, added his own, heavy, stone-like, the manna of the builder, and directed it downward, into the stone of the tower, through the tower into the wall, through the wall into the foundation, through the foundation into the earth, through the earth into the ancient seal, and upward, simultaneously upward. The blueprint came to life. The earth trembled, the walls hummed, all of them, the entire perimeter, every stone, every rune, every crack and every joint and every buttress and every embrasure. The city began to sound, like a bell, like an organ, like a heart. And the dome began to rise. Light streamed from the walls, golden, warm, translucent. It rose in an arc, from the base of the wall upward, curving, closing in. A hemisphere grew over the city like the morning sun, and names ran through the light, hundreds of names, thousands. Every refugee who had made it to Haven Rest, every child in the orphanage, every guard on the wall, the 2 names of those who died in the siege, the name of Hana's father, the names of the 24 knights of Reyna's squad, the name of the burned village of Sonhi, the names of Lila's parents, whom she lost in childhood. Everyone, every single one, woven into the light. The dome grew. It rose, 10 meters, 20, 30, 50. It covered the city like a hand covers a candle, shielding the flame from the wind. Velmar saw it. He stopped his horse. 12,000 soldiers stopped behind him. They watched the golden light rising above the small town, at the names running across its surface, at the hemisphere closing in over the rooftops. Velmar raised his hand. Fire flared in his palm, red, fierce. He hurled the fiery spear at the dome. Impact. The golden light flared brighter at the point of impact, absorbed, scattered. No cracks, no sparks. The S-rank fire vanished like a stone thrown into the ocean. From the north, the demon lords struck simultaneously. Dark magic, a black wave, into the dome. Golden light flared, absorbed, dispersed. 2 armies, human and demonic, stood before the same barrier, on opposite sides of the wall. For the first time in this war, they were not enemies. They were 2 forces locked against the same barrier, and the barrier did not move. Daniel stood on the tower, eyes closed, hands on the stone. Manna flowed through him, 7 streams. He held the dome, held it, held it. Then he opened his eyes, looked down. It was quiet beneath the dome. No sounds from outside penetrated, neither the pounding of 12,000 feet nor the roar of demons. Silence. Warm, golden. Lila stood beside him, her hand on the stone, her eyes open. She was looking at the dome, at the light, at the names. She said quietly, "The bread is still warm." Daniel sat down on the stone. He couldn't stand. His legs wouldn't hold him. Manna flowed from him in a steady stream, but his body was at its limit. He sat right on the tower's stone and laughed. Quietly, not hysterically, calmly, like a man who had done what he had to do and knew he had done the right thing. The dome stood, the wall stood, the city stood, and outside, Duke Velmar looked at the golden hemisphere and, for the first time in his life, didn't know what to do, because his fire couldn't pierce the wall, and the army of demons behind him couldn't pierce the wall either. And at that moment, Velmar's 12,000 soldiers stood with their backs to the 1,500 demons. And the demon lord wasn't looking at the dome. He was looking at the unprotected men. Velmar understood. Daniel had seen from the tower how the Duke turned his horse around, how he bellowed orders, how 12,000 men shifted from a siege formation to a battle formation, facing north, facing the demons. Because there was no choice. The city behind them was cut off, the enemy lay open before them, and for the first time in the entire war, the S-rank fire mage was not fighting for glory. He was fighting because the young fortifier behind the golden wall had left him no other choice. The battle lasted until sunset. Daniel couldn't see the details. The dome blocked his view. But he could feel it. Through the ground, through the vibrations, the blows, the explosions, the fire, the screams. By nightfall, everything had quieted down. The dome stood. Daniel held it. 6 others held it with him. They sat on the tower all day, without moving, hands on the stone. 7 people, 1 stone, 1 wall. In the morning, Daniel lowered the dome, slowly, carefully. The golden light faded. Sounds returned. Birds sang. The wind blew. An ordinary morning. Beyond the wall lay the battlefield, the bodies of demons, hundreds, thousands. Among them, the bodies humans, Velmara's soldiers. Many, but not all. The Duke's army was camped to the south, battered, exhausted, but alive, for the most part. The demon lord lay on the field, dead. His enormous body lay blackened on the trampled earth. 6 violet eyes had gone out. Velmar stood nearby, in melted armor, without a cloak, without a horse. His right hand burned to the bone, by his own fire, the backlash. He stood and looked at the dome, which had just gone dark. Then he looked at the tower, at the figure of the boy at the top. And Daniel saw his eyes, from a distance of 200 meters, through the morning light. He saw. There was no hatred in Duke Velmar's eyes, no rage. There was understanding, slow, painful, like a fracture that heals crookedly. The Duke turned, gave the order. The army broke camp and left, southward, in silence, without trumpets, without banners. Daniel stood on the tower and watched them go. Then he looked north, at the battlefield, at the dead demon lord, at the thousands of dark bodies. Then down, at the city, his city, whole, unharmed. 2 names on the wall. Those 2 from the last siege. No others had been added. The dome had held. The wall had held. The people had held. He looked at the 6 of them. Lila sat on a rock and ate her bread, warm. She hadn't forgotten to bring a whole basket with her to the tower. Hana stood with her father's spear and looked out at the battlefield, quietly, without a word. Ari was sleeping. Her face buried in a scroll, she slept. Her glasses had slipped to the tip of her nose. Reyna was cleaning her sword, calmly, methodically, with a practiced motion. Sonha sat on the edge of the tower with her legs dangling, looking down. The children had come out of the basement. They were playing in the courtyard. A 4-year-old boy was running after a pigeon. Maylin stood by the parapet, her back to the battlefield, her face toward the city, toward the library, toward the rooftops, toward the life she had chosen. Daniel sat down next to Lila. She silently handed him some bread. He took it, took a bite. Warm, soft, with a crispy crust, the taste of home. He chewed the bread and looked at the city. Somewhere deep beneath the tower lay the ancient rift, a seal cracked but still alive. His work was not yet finished. Rifts across the continent. The mystery of who opened the first one. Runes that needed renewing. Walls that needed building. Maybe a year, maybe 2, maybe a lifetime. But now, this morning, on this tower, with bread in his hand and 6 people by his side. Now he sat and looked at his city and knew that everything he had built stood. Every stone, every moat, every tower, every rune. Every bakery and library and orphanage and training yard and workshop. It's all worth it. Because he wasn't building walls, he was building for people, for each and every one of them. And walls built for people don't fall. He finished his bread, brushed off the crumbs, stood up. His legs were still shaking, but he stood. He looked east, toward where the sun was rising above the horizon. Clear, smoke-free. For the first time in a year, the horizon was clear. He turned to Hana and said he needed to go down to the cellars to check the seal. She nodded. He descended from the tower, walked through the city. People were coming out of their houses, looking at the sky, clear, golden, without a dome, without smoke, without fear. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were just standing there, breathing. Lila caught up with him at City Hall. She pressed another flatbread into his hand. Hot. He took it. She smiled, quietly, brightly. Just like on the first day. Just like back then by the tower. The same hope. Only now it wasn't cautious. It was confident. He smiled back. Then he walked on, toward the basements, toward the ancient runes, toward the seal that needed to be restored, toward the next wall that needed to be built. Because an engineer never stops. An engineer builds. Daniel Reed, 29 years in one world, 1 year in another. Wall fortifier, level 35. He walked through his city, over stones that remembered his palms, and the stones were warm beneath his feet, as if alive.